Hotep, everybody. This is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show. It is Dr. King Day. It is January 20th, 2025. And to bring some purpose to this day, I have our brother back on the African History Network show, Professor Manu Ampim, to discuss the distortion of the legacy of the revolutionary Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Hotep, brother, how you doing today?
Hotep, my brother, I'm doing great, and I'm in the trenches.
Absolutely, you're in the trenches. All right. And I wanted to have you on today. I know you were on our brother Carl Nelson's show this morning, talking about this topic, the legacy of the revolutionary Dr. King. I had you on my Blog Talk Radio show years ago, man. I think that was 2011, discussing this. I was going through my archives, preparing for this interview today, and going over some information, and actually went over some of your notes from your website, manuampim.com as well. So we know that today is Dr. King Day. Unfortunately, you got this white supremacist wet dream taking place at the same time today, but we know today is Dr. King Day, and there's celebrations all across the country. But a lot of people, and I've spoken at a number of Dr. King Day celebrations. I don't get asked to speak at a lot of them, because I deal with the revolutionary Dr. King. But you've talked about before about the revolutionary Dr. King and the real Dr. King, and the difference between that and the lovable, huggable image of Dr. King that everybody is fed. And I want to just talk a quick minute about Professor Manu Ampim. He's a historian and primary firsthand researcher specializing in African and African-American history and culture. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Management and a Master's of Arts in History, African-American Studies. His master's thesis was the revolutionary Martin Luther King Jr. in 1989. And it's being expanded into a 2-volume work entitled Martin Luther King, The Evolution of a Revolutionary. And he teaches at Contra Costa College in the history department and Africana studies department. So give us your synopsis here of the revolutionary Dr. King, which is probably different than what a lot of people saw today at Dr. King Day celebrations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I've actually started working on the revolutionary Dr. King when I was a grad student at Morgan State University back in the 80s. And I decided to do my work on King as a revolutionary because I was really stunned and shocked when I heard some speeches by King. I thought that was somebody else because how radical he was. And I began to read material that was stunning. And I recognized, I said, damn, he's been completely distorted. So my work on the revolutionary King is really, it's a lot of work, but what's easy or simple, I would say simple about it, is that he is the roadmap. He presents the guideline, because King himself presents a clear view and clear vision of exactly what their work was about, to overturn the system of white supremacy and the Jim Crow system of racial segregation and the goals moving forward. So my work was really to help give King voice by looking at his sermons as a minister, the press conferences, the interviews, the articles and essays, the 5 books that he wrote. I spent tons of hours in the archives in the King Center in Atlanta, the Mughal Collection at Boston University, and I spent hundreds of hours, literally hundreds of hours, at the FBI headquarters in D.C. And what emerged is a man that, as the FBI said, was a pronounced threat to the U.S. government. They saw King, the FBI did under J. Edgar Hoover and William Sullivan, as the most dangerous black man in America. They didn't see anybody else as the most damn, but they dubbed King that. So there was a Get King campaign for the last 6 years of his life, where the FBI had more surveillance on King than any person in the history of the Bureau. So King, as a revolutionary, begins to emerge more and more as the struggle became more and more radical. One thing that folks should know, to understand King, is to understand what he presented on a regular basis, that there were 2 periods. There was what he called the first period, or the civil rights period, from 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision to 1965 when the Voting Rights Bill was passed. So at that point, Dr. King and his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which he was the head of, they said, and King's position was that in a sense, Congress signed the civil rights movement out of existence. In other words, those goals have been met where Black people now can legally go into hotels, motels, restaurants. They can ride a Greyhound bus from one state to another. So those are all illegal. So those laws are on the books with civil rights and voting rights. But as he said, laws declare rights, but they don't deliver the rights. The people themselves have to go out and make the laws a reality. But at least
Right.
the laws are on the books. So the radical king emerges at the end of 65 with the passing of the Voting Rights Bill in August of that year. Now, King said, now we turn to the second phase, or what he called the human rights phase of the Black struggle for freedom in America. And that's when
Right.
you have the hot coals that hit his lips in 65 and 66 and 1967 and 1968. Here you have a completely different king that emerges because the goals were different. Plus, after a decade of struggle, people were tired of no real practical physical progress to help Black people improve their lot in life. So here's where King is now. He's not a civil rights leader anymore. He's embracing human rights. He embraced Black power, as well as the fact that King publicly, without hesitation or reservation, called for the support of armed liberation movements, not only in Vietnam, but on the African continent. So most of this material is not known. And I dare young people, as well as other uninformed people, allow the media to freeze King in the concept of I had a dream. So they present him as an abstract dreamer as opposed to a practical activist. And here's where people get misled, is that they don't understand, and they say, well, we're tired of the I have a dream speech. We got better and more important radical things to do. What are you talking about? In the speech, he condemns police brutality not once but twice. You
Right.
have people that never even heard the 16-minute speech. And even and so, Brother Michael, I have an assignment for the public
Mm-hmm.
as well as my classes at Contra Costa College, and that is find the I have a dream speech. And in the vast majority of cases, you will not find an accurate full speech, because what King says is he is condemning, as he said, vicious racists in Alabama, and he's condemning the horrors of police brutality. Those are usually edited out
Right.
by people who have an agenda so that the speech can be sanitized. So there's a far more radical uh, uh, component of King that people don't look at, and it simply means that the media and biographers have been very effective at distorting his political legacy.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's important. We'll talk about the I Have a Dream speech, because originally the speech was titled Normalcy No More, if I remember correctly. Normalcy No More. Then it was titled a canceled check. Um, and we know in the speech he talks about the Emancipation Proclamation and how 100 years prior, African Americans were given a promissory note, and when we go to the bank to deposit that promissory note, it was marked insufficient funds. And one of the things he was doing in the speech was talking about holding America accountable for the promises that they made to African Americans. It's only towards the end of the speech, after Mahalia Jackson screams out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin," then he shifts and really improvises and starts talking about a dream. We're referring back to actually a speech he gave in Detroit in June of 63, incorporating the phrase "I have a dream," which he got from Prathia Hall, who was an activist for SNCC, African American woman, Prathia Hall, who was an activist for SNCC. That's where he got the phrase I have a dream" from, and he modified it and made it his own. So let's start at this point right here. Explain the difference between civil rights and human rights. Civil rights and human rights.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Is that civil rights are rights that someone has within a particular society that are bestowed by government. So rights within a particular society are civil rights. It could be the right to vote, the right to hold office, the right to, own particular property, things like that. But those
Right.
are civil rights are given by government. Human rights are higher than that. Human rights are rights that we are born with. So the right to life, the right to be free from torture, the right to be free from slavery, the right to food, the right to water. These are fundamental rights just because we're human. No one gives us human rights. They may try to take them away, but no one gives anybody human rights. They just are. So
Right.
this is a much larger issue of rights when we're dealing with human rights. And the United Nations issued the Universal Declaration of Human Rights back on December 10th of 1948. So what folks don't understand is that there had been a human rights focus and effort uh, for decades among
Yeah.
Black folks and the people in general in the U.S. It's just that civil rights was more prominent. And there's some people that never, people know about Malcolm's stance on that, but there were many people that never felt that civil rights was adequate enough. Whereas for
Right.
Dr. King, he believed that you had to work in stages and that you
Yes.
had to have rights on the book so that if somebody's demonstrating for the right to go into a dirty, nasty bathroom or greasy restaurant, at least the police and others can't beat you up legally. It'll be illegal to do it if you have the rights on the book. So for King on the book, so for King, these rights were part of the process of at least having the legal rights in order to work on the struggle in stages. So he began to exclusively talk about and work towards human rights after 1965. So he's not a civil rights leader in the second phase. So someone who describes him as that has really distorted Dr. King's political work. So when people are talking about Martin Luther King Day and living the dream, what dream? He ain't talking about no
Right.
dream. He's a practical activist. You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
so the issue is that because people have not read his works, they don't even know what his plan is. I was
Right.
listening to the radio for a while today, and I heard a lot of rhetoric of people out at rallies and demonstrations today, and they are all over the place. Not a single person said anything about Dr. King's political work and what his agenda was as he was presenting it in 66, in 1968, even though he lays it out. And by the way, Brother Michael, as people are watching and listening to us, I want to challenge the listeners and sorry, the viewers to see if they
Hmm.
could come up with an accurate list of the 5 books that Dr. King wrote. Not books about him,
Okay.
but books that he wrote. 5 books. It's very difficult to do because he's the most misrepresented and misunderstood figure in U.S. history. And by the way, on the "I Have a Dream" speech, just one other thing. This is
Yeah.
during the civil rights era, and we know about the inauguration today and all of that.
Hmm.
People should understand because I heard a college president say just recently he praised John F. Kennedy at the King event. And I said, well, first of all, Dr. King did not trust John F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy. He said these are politicians who would not
Right.
do anything unless it helps their political career. And he
Neither
didn't
did John
trust him.
Lewis. Because
Absolutely.
John Lewis was going to call him out. He was going to have a scathing rebuke of John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He had to tone it back. And,
Yep.
and so the thing is that if John F. Kennedy was such a great civil rights president, well, guess what? He was embarrassed by the greatest demonstration for civil rights in the history of the country back at the March on Washington back in August of 1968. John F.
Hmm.
Kennedy was embarrassed and even tried to stop the march. Yeah, he tried to stop the march. So he was
Yeah.
no civil rights president, but that's the phase that's one of the events in that civil rights phase, and it embarrassed the Kennedy administration. It eventually helped to lead to the legislation, but not only that march, but just after the so-called "I Have a Dream" speech. By the way, it's a 16-minute speech. The
Yes.
first 12 minutes, he's there to, as he said, dramatize a shameful condition. So
Right.
as he exposes American hypocrisy, that's what the goal was, and to stand up for Black manhood and Black
Hmm.
womanhood. And so he said, as a leader, but despite these problems, I still have a dream that one day. So he's just painting a vision so that the people would not leave on a down note. As a leader, you
Right.
have to give people something to do. And all he did in that last 3.5 minutes or so was try to inspire people to go out and act. And that's all it was. But what the media does, they skip the first 12 minutes and they leave
Hmm.
right to the dream part. But I flipped the script. When I'm airing the speech, play the first 12 minutes and I cut it there because
Right.
that's what he was there to present. So civil rights has its place, but it is not the entire goal. And the government knew that, and so did Dr. King, and that's why he's been frozen in that civil rights period. But the human rights work of Dr. King is even today is largely unknown by most people in the public, and that is by design.
Absolutely, absolutely. Keep people ignorant, and it's the same thing with the I've been to the mountaintop speech. With they played the last 2 or 3 minutes talking about getting to the mountaintop. They skipped the part where he talks about economic empowerment and he talks about boycotting white-owned businesses that mistreat us. They skip over all of that. They skip the part where he tells he's speaking to people in Memphis, Tennessee during the sanitation worker strike, and he tells them to tell their friends to boycott Coca-Cola, Wonder Bread, Seal Test Milk, and Heart's Bread. Heart's Bread, I think it was. He tells them to go out and boycott these white corporations. They skip over all that and get to the mountaintop. Okay, and that speech was about 45 minutes. Okay, it's on YouTube. People need to go listen to the whole speech. But because you mentioned the I Have a Dream speech, and there was a good article that I'm gonna pull up this article that dealt with the history behind the I Have a Dream speech, because it talked about how in none of the drafts of the speech did the phrase I have a dream exist. Okay, and Dr. King improvised, but he talks about police brutality in here twice, as you mentioned. Okay, now this is from the U.S. National Archives. There are different sources for it. This one right here is from archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, and you can just search for "I Have a Dream" speech, and they have it right here. Okay, and he talks about us being given. He talks about fighting against segregation, voter suppression, all of that here in the speech. Everything a lot of white people, regardless of political affiliation, okay, a lot of white people don't want us to, and some African Americans don't want us to deal with. But go ahead. Any particular things you want us to focus in on this speech?
Yeah, well, the thing is that it's important to know, in National Archives, you can never go wrong there. I would recommend to people to get the authentic speech because otherwise you're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a King event recently, and the organizers, they had about 20 people taking parts of the speech to read it. And as I was listening before I came up as the keynote, I recognized some things were missing. So I
Yeah,
told them that's a creative approach to have people read parts of the speech, but you left out about 10% because I said I only heard police brutality once.
once. Yep.
It should be twice, but the best source is AmericanRhetoric.com. And the reason
Okay.
why that's the best source, they have the 100 most popular speeches in U.S. history. And yeah, I Have a Dream is arguably the most popular. But why I recommend that is because you can listen at the entire 16-minute audio and the verified transcript. So you
Okay.
can actually do both. And that's why it's important because I've seen a lot of websites and they mix and mingle things. And here you got a popular speech and it's distorted. But it's really important to know that King is there to, as they said, dramatize a shameful condition. And they were there
Yeah.
for freedom and jobs and not to talk about an abstract dream. But
Exactly.
here's how the mainstream media, biographers, some civil rights leaders, and even
Mm-hmm.
family members. Even family members has been a part of this misrepresentation, and
Wow.
Pulitzer Prize winning biographers, and that is it's like this. When I was in Baltimore a while back, when I was working on my Revolutionary Martin Luther King work, there was a elementary school teacher. He was on the radio. He said that the third grade class had to draw a picture of Dr. King as they saw him.
Mm-hmm.
So a young girl drew a picture of Dr. King lying in bed. So the teacher said, "Baby, well, why'd you draw a picture of him lying in bed?" She said, "Well, he had a dream, so I figured that he must have been asleep, you know." And I said, "You know what? There it is. That's
Right.
exactly it." So the young girl captured exactly what the propaganda is meant to do, is to present him as an abstract dreamer. But the month after he talked about that dream in D.C., started to talk about the American nightmare. It said my dream turned into a nightmare when 4 little girls were bombed at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. My dream turned into a nightmare where bombs are dropped on communities in Vietnam. So we begin to talk about that nightmare very frequently. In fact, his last sermon was unfulfilled dreams. So folks have to, and not only that, he said the dreams were not deferred, as Langston used to say. He said these dreams were repudiated by a vicious racist system. So it's a lot of things we need to know about the speech, but the main thing is folks should listen and should read it and know that as public as the speech is, the distortion of it is great. So if that can be distorted, the question is, what else don't we know about King that's not so well known? And that's the other part of the distortions that take place. And this is one of the big concerns I had when I started to go to the archives and look at his material and do the interviews with some of the leading activists at the time to get their perspective on how King was distorted. So not only is that speech distorted, but the whole process of him being supposedly weak. What these cats talking about?
Exactly.
King represented strength. He represented manhood. And young folks in particular, I've heard some of the most strange things, that they don't want to deal with King because he just, he wasn't tough enough or something crazy like that. And people want to go out and live the dream, but they cannot define what is the dream. What is King's plan? So again, he lays his plan out. So I say to those viewers, what are the 5 books? We want you to put those, because if you can name the books, you're on the right track. And it's going to be very hard to do that, by the way. Very difficult.
Exactly. Well, I have 2 of them here. This is his last book. Where do we go from here? Chaos or Community, 1967. Crucial book. Chapter 2, he talks about the Black Power movement. You dealt with this before. From your website, manuampim.com. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. supported Black Power. This essay you did, I printed this up January 20th, 2011. I printed this up January 20th, 2011. Okay. This right
now,
here.
That's work. That's work from the 1980s.
Yeah, yes. From 1989. Yep, from your master's thesis, 1989, the revolutionary Martin Luther King Jr. But because I interviewed you around that time, so I printed this up and I share this with people as well, because he is one of the most misunderstood leaders of African Americans. So let's do this here. I want to go to okay, so we talked about civil rights versus human rights. We've talked about the I Have a Dream speech as well, and it was it was later called I Have a Dream. It's going to be called a canceled check, because in the speech he talks about African Americans being given a promissory note, and then when we went to the bank to deposit it, is marked insufficient funds. Okay, now let's see. You talked about Dr. King publicly called for the support of armed liberation struggles in Africa, Asia, and Latin America in numerous speeches, interviews, and writings. Give us some examples of this, because once again, at Dr. King Day celebrations, this is something that they're not going to talk about.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's put that in context. One of the things that is not known by folks is that they think that Dr. King was a pacifist. Now, that word was being used pretty frequently. He even used it. But King was not a pacifist, nor was Gandhi a pacifist. A pacifist is somebody that embraces nonviolence as a way of life. It's a principle. Whereas for King, it was more tactical. For Gandhi, it was more tactical. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, he participated in 3 armed conflicts. And not only that, he continued to argue for training in arms for those that didn't believe in nonviolence. And he even says that towards the end of his life. So Gandhi, under no circumstances, was some pacifist. That was just a strategy against against British colonialism, as India was under that authority. Here's what King said, and then I want to talk about him embracing liberation movements, because people understood. So here's one of the things that King said about the tactical use of nonviolence. he never once said that people should not defend themselves when attacked. He said the issue was whether or not it was tactically wise to use a gun or knife in a demonstration for the
Right.
right to vote. So this is what he said. I contended that the debate over the question of self-defense was unnecessary, since few people suggested that Negroes should not defend themselves as individuals when attacked. The question was not whether one should use his gun when his home was attacked, but whether it was tactically wise to use a gun while participating in an organized demonstration. And that comes from the book you mentioned, Where Do We Go From Here? So
Yeah.
for King, from the beginning, even in the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 and 56, he had armed men around his house. And not only that, but King had a gun underneath the sofa right there. So when Bayard Rustin came from New York to teach this Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence, he said, "Hey, look, before you said, watch out. There's a gun
Right.
in that seat over there." And not only so, there's no time that King does not have armed people around him when he needed it.
Yeah.
So people should understand that he's simply arguing that it doesn't make sense to get into a skirmish with the police over the right to vote, because the media and the propagandists would focus on the skirmish and not the issue at hand. So that's one thing. Now, in terms of him embracing armed liberation struggles, let me help people out with one of the most popular speeches. There are hundreds of cases, but I'm not going to ask anybody to go to the archive. I'm going to ask you just to take a look at what's already there. So the one speech that people know about or heard about is Beyond Vietnam. This is April 4th, 1967. Now, some people change the title. It's not Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam. That's a different speech. Why I oppose the war. That's April 30th. We're talking April 4th. So King said that these are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the wombs of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the world are rising up as never before. We in the West must support these revolutions. He's talking about revolutions for independence. He didn't say we should support them if they would put their arms down. He's talking about revolutions. He's talking about in Vietnam. He's talking about in Mozambique and Angola and South Africa. He's talking about in Zimbabwe, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. Look at all of these countries, how they gained their independence through armed struggle. So King said that they should be supported. He also says this. People need to know about these revolutionary movements. King wrote this: "We must be willing to understand why many of the young nations will have to pass through the same extremism, revolution, and aggression that form our history." What is he talking about? He's talking about the American Revolutionary War. This also comes from Where Do We Go From Here? That's the last book that he wrote. He said that they're going to have to go through the same extremism, revolution, and aggression that formed our country. This country became independent as a result of the American Revolutionary War, from 1775 to 1783. So when the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783, that's what gave birth to the country. And this is what King was referring to. If that's not enough, guess what else he says? He said that either, he's talking about the barefoot and shirtless people, he said either they will have to pass through, that either they share in the blessings of the world, or they organize to break down and overthrow those structures of government which stand in the way of their goals. And Dr. King would always quote John F. Kennedy. He said that those that make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Right.
If folks need more, if they need more, Dr. King, you should read what he had to say, A Testament of Hope. That's the last interview he gave that came out posthumously in 69, the very next year. He said he was very happy that people were going through this kind of aggression to become independent. He's not condemning them because of their methods. He is applauding the people. Not only that, Dr. King was a prominent member of the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa that called for the support, unconditional support of these revolutionary movements on the African continent. If you need more, King was also a prominent member of the American Committee on Africa that said every support should be given to these nations that are fighting to become independent. And King said to the LA Times, he said during the Vietnam War, he said he would have, he uses the word pacifism. It's kind of a little misleading, but he said he would have given up his pacifism to fight against Hitler in the 1940s because Hitler was such a menace. That is
Right.
not somebody who's a pacifist. Here's a man who was very practical in the use of arms. By the way, King believed that nonviolence was in the U.S. He favored that as a method of freedom, but he was not wedded to that. He consistently said he's not wedded to it. He just believes that we don't have the artillery. He says the white folks have the government, the army, the National Guard, and an extreme right wing that would not use this word, that would not hesitate to exterminate every black man, woman, and child. So for King, it was an issue of practicality. And he
Right.
said with the Poor People's Campaign that was scheduled for late April of 1968, Dr. King called this a last desperate attempt for nonviolence, a last desperate attempt for nonviolence. He said, look, they wanted to shut down all business in Washington, D.C. until they passed a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And if they did not, yeah, that's it right there. And if they did not, if they did not pass a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged, Dr. King told the other revolutionaries in the Black Power movement, you can move forward with whatever method you think would solve the problem in America, but give us 3 months. They wanted to shut down all vehicular traffic, so no cars would be going into DC for people to do any business. They would tie up all the phone lines. They would shut down business. King said the whole goal was to shut down DC and dislocate cities all around America so it would be no more business as usual. So the whole goal was to dislocate a city without destroying it. So for
Right.
him, this is what the focus was. And he said, if this didn't work, he said, you brothers can take over with whatever method you think will work. King's not condemning them. He's trying to find out as he continued to explain what would solve the race problem in America. He knew that these struggles were winnable abroad because these countries were winning their independence. But he said that it was different in America because both the oppressor and the oppressed are both at home. There's nobody to kick out. Whereas in Africa and other places, they can kick out the oppressor. They can kick out
Right. The colonizer.
the colonizer. Exactly.
Right.
So this is why he looks at things very differently. And there's not one document that King ever says something even halfway negative about those that were fighting for their liberation through armed struggle. In fact, his biggest file, the biggest file in the King archives, the biggest file is his file on Africa. What's in his file? Articles on African liberation struggles, letters to and from actual revolutionaries as he kept close to them, Tom and Boyer, people in the Mau Mau Rebellion and Zimbabwe and South Africa. Why is he corresponding with them? Because he said that these are the same struggle, the struggles in Africa and the struggle in the U.S. He said this is the same struggle.
Right.
And he said it was based that we were fighting against quote unquote white supremacy and the contempt for life.
Right.
That's where you see King embracing these revolutionary movements. And this is why the government was very concerned and that's why they thought King was phony in talking nonviolence to the public, but then embracing revolutionary movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
Exactly. So on the screen, and you have so much, man, I'm going through pulling articles, everything. So this slide right here, this is from a presentation that I've done over the past few years dealing with the distortion, what I call it, the distortion of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The revolutionary will not be televised on the television. That's a presentation I've been doing for years where I get deep into this history. And I did that presentation once at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and they never asked me to come back and speak again. It was on a Dr. King Day because brother, I dealt with the Dr. King that I dealt with the revolutionary Dr. King, and I dealt with the Dr. King that used the Deacons for Defense and Justice to protect him. Okay,
personal defense. Yes,
personal defense. And I quoted Dr. King from his own works, talking about how he supported armed liberation in Africa and Asia, things of this nature, man. And I challenged them. I said, I don't care. I said, I'll debate anybody you have. I don't care how many master's degrees and PhDs they have. I said, and I pulled up the cover of the book, Deacons for Defense and Justice. I said, you trying to tell me the Deacons for Defense and Justice are not part of the civil rights movement? I dared them. I pulled up the book, this nonviolent stuff will get you killed, how guns made the civil rights movement possible, by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. We're going to come to that in a minute because there's an excerpt from that I want to show to show people to back up what you were saying. I said, you trying to tell me that they're not part of the civil rights movement? I said, no. I said, we have to stop lying to people about this. And there's a whole industry of, this is why I have a problem with these corporate funded breakfasts and dinners and luncheons, things like this. And they bring some civil rights superstar up who lies about what happened. Okay. Okay. So let's look at this quote here. This is from his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And I think you mentioned this. Let me see. Hold on. Let's go to the screen share right here. Okay. This deals with Dr. King's stance on nonviolence and how he adopted it as a tactic, but not a way of life. As a tactic, but not a way of life. All right, hold on just a second here. I'm going to go back to this. And
while you're doing that, the reason
go ahead.
Yeah, and the reason why this is suppressed is because of the fact that the those that control the narrative, they want people to be in a straitjacket in how they can respond. And the bottom line is that there was different ways to respond. King said he didn't know what would solve the problem. He just engaged in the truth searching process, and that the better approach, because we have to be realistic about the bloodshed and so forth, but the better approach would be if we can solve the problem through nonviolence. He never felt that was going to solve all of the problems, because he recognized that we're dealing with, as he said, the vicious white supremacists in America who would not hesitate to exterminate Black folks. So King understood how vicious they were, and that certain methods could only be a tactic. And this is why he embraces the revolutionary movements abroad using weapons and arms. I mentioned all of the countries. Take a look at the Mau Mau. Why is he in association with the Mau Mau? Because these were winnable struggles. King was a minister, and he was concerned about the least of these, or the people that he said were the shirtless and barefoot people of the world. Why wouldn't he be concerned about their welfare? He certainly was. And this is why he's in close contact with and in support of these revolutionaries and the revolutionary movements that they were part of. And the government was tracking all of this. This is why the FBI was very concerned about King. And it's just that the public is not aware of this. But if we go back, we will see that King was hated across America. And he was hated for the reason that he was not going to back down. He couldn't be bought off. They couldn't get him out of the street. They couldn't just get him to be on the lecture circuit to talk about rights as opposed to fighting for them. And this was a big concern to the government, and they had no choice but to take King out of his lobby, because he's like a vicious and a powerful lion that you're not going to move him away from his mission. And that's part of the concern that the government had to set him up for his assassination in 1968.
Exactly. Okay. Looking at this now, this is a slide from my presentation I've done over the years. This deals with Dr. King, nonviolence as a tactic, not a way of life. This comes from page 27 of his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, 1967. He said, I contend that the debate over the question of self-defense was unnecessary, since few people suggested that Negroes should not defend themselves as individuals when attacked. The question was not whether one should use his gun when his home was attacked, but whether it was tactically wise to use a gun while participating in an organized demonstration. He goes on to say, now this is from Why I Oppose the Vietnam War, April 30th, 1967. King stated a number of times in April 1967 that although he, as a pacifist, if he had been called to military service against Hitler, that, quote, I believe I would have probably temporarily sacrificed my pacifism because Hitler was such an evil force in history, end quote. He added, quote, I would willingly have fought against the Nazi menace of the 1940s, end quote. Okay, and this appeared in the Los Angeles Herald Examiner. And then we got to talk about this. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, founded in 1964. And these brothers were made up of former Korean War veterans, World War II veterans, who legally armed themselves to protect civil rights workers because the civil rights workers couldn't get protection from the local sheriffs and police departments, things of this nature. Okay. Now, you mentioned, I want to talk about this, and I'm going to hand it to, also I have the clip, I have the, this right here. Beyond Vietnam, April 4th, 1967. Dr. King publicly supported the armed liberation struggles in Africa and Asia. Quote, these are revolutionary times all over the globe. Men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the wombs of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the world are rising up as never before. We in the West must support these revolutions. Okay, so this is the Dr. King that you won't hear about at the corporate funded luncheons and dinners and things like this on Dr. King Day. And also I talk about, I'm going to give you some sources here, people, so you can research more of this. This deals with Dr. King and the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa, the ANLCA that Professor Manu and Ampim spoke about. In the 1960s, Dr. King and other leaders called for the support of armed liberation struggles in Africa through two organizations, the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa and the American Committee on Africa. For example, Dr. King was a leading figure in the ANLCA. You never hear about this except from Professor Manu and Ampim, which was formed in 1962 to address the important issue of African Americans assuming a greater responsibility for the formation of U.S. policy in sub-Saharan Africa. And then we have the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa. Talks about this as well. I got this from, I think this is from Michigan State University, their online archives. They have information there. Go ahead and comment on this, brother. Then this came from africanactivist.msu.edu, Michigan State University. Go ahead and comment on this, brother. Then I want to talk about this nonviolent stuff to get you killed, the book by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. for a minute.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. What I did was I put some of this online, but I have the original documents from the conferences in 62, 64, 1967, and these were public statements. These were policy statements that were being made, and King helped frame and form these statements. So what Brother Michael's reading is some of the statements, but the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa, which King was a founding member, for him, what they were focused on doing was shaping U.S. foreign policy in Africa, and their whole goal was to take positions in support of these revolutionary movements, and that's why I mentioned Angola, Mozambique, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and they make these statements to support these revolutionaries who had become, and they said that every support, this is what every support should be given to them, and that they say in the statements that we rejoice with those African countries that have joined the community of free nations. Yes. They didn't say we rejoice, but we really are not happy that they use armed struggle. No, not at all. We rejoice with them. And so so if King was somebody who had an issue with it, he would have left the organization. He would have left the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa, but quite to the contrary. They had public conferences with public policy statements that he helped write and form. And not
Yeah.
only that, but the American Committee on Africa, George Hauser was the leader of that organization. George Hauser did the fact-finding work and research in Africa. And Hauser came back, and who was he meeting with? King and others to help form the American Committee on Africa's statement. And they too called for the support of these revolutionary movements. So this is why people have to understand that in 66, in 67, and 68, when the hot coals hit Dr. King's lips, now he's criticizing everybody, including the U.S. government. So King would often say that the bombs that are being dropped abroad, they explode at home. He says that regarding Vietnam, but he also is referring to these revolutionary movements in Africa. And
Hmm.
what's really amazing in terms of people not knowing this, this is by design. The first author, the biographer to win a Pulitzer Prize on Dr. King was none other than David Garrow. He
Yeah.
wrote Bearing the Cross. The problem is Bearing the Cross,
He wrote
um,
his autobiography, right? It
yeah,
was
he did. His
his
biography.
hmm
Yeah, he wrote the biography. So David Garrow writes an 800-page book on King. And the problem is you had actual activists in the 60s and the 50s who embraced David Garrow as the quote expert on King. And when I was doing so he had just published his book right before I started my work on the Revolutionary King in 1987. So I used David Garrow's book to look at his sources because I was on my way to the archives. And David Garrow mentioned something that shows his dishonesty. He
hmm
said something that this is what he said. He made a passing statement in Bearing the Cross and said that the biggest file that King had in the archives that he kept was on Africa and the decolonization movement in Africa. He
Right.
says that, but in an 800-page book, why isn't he covering this? So it's this distortion of King and a distortion of history by omission. So he simply omits one of the most important aspects of Dr. King's life and his work. So I use David Garrow's, not only that statement, because when I go to the archives, I said, damn, he's right. How
hmm
could he not have a major section or major chapter on what King was most concerned about?
Right.
Because it's systematic distortion and misrepresentation of King's work and his concerns. So then when someone looks at Bearing the Cross, they look at David Garrow's taking two-thirds of a page to summarize a speech. So, wow, he's very thorough. But guess what? He uses the ellipsis marks. He uses the three dots to skip over the very parts of the
Oh,
speech King is saying to embrace these revolutionary movements. So that when people read it, they say, wow, this guy's very thorough. He's got two-thirds of a page on the speech, and then he's got 5 or 6 sources listed. Yes, but if you go to the source, you say, wow, this man is dishonest. And so, in other words, in this thorough book, he is deliberately omitting the very things that blows up his whole premise about King and this nonviolent tradition. So this is why people don't know about the American Committee on Africa or the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa and their numerous statements beginning in 1962. So, you showed a couple of them, but I just put just a couple of those online. There's a long list of this that you get from the archives that David Garrow has to have, but he refused to write about because he too is about distorting King. And by the way, Brother Michael, in 2027, brother, we got to, no, sorry, the end of 2026, we got to
okay.
come back because in 2 years, the assassination records on King
hmm
that was in the assassination select committee hearing
Yeah.
in 1977, those records were very sensitive from the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So they were put in the National Archives for
Right.
50 years. So
Yeah.
they're there for 2 generations. They're not going to come out until they're scheduled to come out around January 30th or so, to
Oh, this year. Yeah.
2027. Yeah,
2027.
20,
Okay.
yeah, January 2027, and it will be a smear campaign of Dr. King like we've not seen before. So David Garrow's already given, the same guy that wrote the biography, he's given us a preview. The FBI that hated Dr. King tried to
hmm
break up his family, tried to get him to
Right.
commit suicide, and they leaked some phony documents out there. And David
hmm
Garrow, the King biographer, then wrote an article talking about he said the troubling legacy of Martin Luther King, and David Garrett was condemned by many historians, activists, and writers because of the fact that why would this man come out and try to destroy Dr. King's character from some shaky, shady, unverified sources within the FBI? Anybody that goes to the FBI headquarters like I did knows that these people are prone to errors. They make lots of spelling errors, names are wrong, information is suspect and shady is very well known. Even David Garrett knows that. He said that one thing he knows by going to the archives, you cannot rely just on the FBI records because you have people that have an agenda. These people are sloppy. They are semi-professional at best, and you cannot trust them because they have a motive and an agenda. David Garrett says that, but yet he engages in the slandering of Dr. King's character without even seeing the documents. What he's talking about is racist, anti-King FBI officials who are summarizing what they claim to be some tape. How do we know? We don't know. These people lied about a whole lot of different things. So we got to be prepared because in 2027, it will be one of the greatest slanderous attacks on Dr. King. And we got the preview in 2019. I said all of that to say, this is why, brother, the public does not know about this because of scoundrels. And I did say that, yes, like David Garrett, who would make money and fame based on misrepresenting the struggle of Black people. And it's the problem, I blame Black people for promoting David Garrett and then later Taylor Branch, another Pulitzer Prize-winning white male author. And why would you promote these white guys that never were involved with any struggle? Now, well, Professor, I thought we read everybody. We do, but guess what? We need to look at their angle and their motives. Taylor Branch said that he never met Dr. King because of disinterest. What are you talking about? The SCLC headquarters was in Atlanta. That's where King and his colleagues operated from. Taylor Branch lived in Atlanta. Why didn't he meet them? He said because of disinterest. You have people being brutalized by a vicious white supremacist system. Black people have to fight, struggle, shed blood, and die to go into a dirty restaurant or restroom or be able to have any kind of semblance of rights. And this man that was disinterested, but when the coast was clear, when the rights are gained, suddenly he comes out as the big time expert, making tons of money with fame and notoriety. And now people go to Taylor Branch and or David Garrett as the so-called experts. Are you kidding me? And you got Black folks that made contributions during that
there.
Yes, that were there and participated, that advocate, that they give up their own agency with their own experience to elevate some white guys who've done nothing to give any of that money back to the Black community. They've done nothing to give any of this back to younger historians that can also learn the methods of research. No, they had access because of their whiteness and their ability to get interviews and all of that. And all of a sudden they're going to give us an 800-page book by Garrett and a 1,000-page book, part 1, 1,000-page book by Taylor Branch, and they're being presented as some experts. And let me just say this last thing to show folks how crazy it is. We don't know it because these men suppress it. I mentioned David Garrett suppressing it. Also, you know what? Taylor Branch had just wrote Parting the Waters around 88, and I was working on my master's thesis at the time, 87, 88, and 89. And Taylor Branch was on the radio at Morgan State University. And so I called in. I said, Mr. Branch, I appreciate the information that you shared, but I noticed that you hadn't said anything about Dr. King and the second phase of the Black freedom struggle. He wrote and talked quite a bit about the second phase, the human rights phase. Can you share with us that information? Oh, I'm not familiar with this. The second phase. Excuse me, sir. You wrote a 1,000-page book. What do you mean second phase? It's in his sermons. It's in his speeches. It's in his press conferences. It's in his books. It's in the FBI archives. It's in the archives in Mooger Collection in Boston. It's in the archives at the King Center. What are you talking about, sir? Oh, my God, I would, yes, please, if you can give me your number, I'd like to call and discuss this. It is 2025, and I'm still waiting for a phone call from Taylor Branch to discuss this. This man, this is impossible. King lays it out. He lays it out very plainly. So if folks don't know, like for example, brother, before we move, I just wanted to say this, just
Go
so
ahead.
folks know, his organization, 1965, to show you the shift that Dr. King made, and
Southern
as he
Christian Leadership Conference. That's what you're talking about.
yes, the Southern Christian, yes, and he
That
was
organization. Okay.
yes, he was the head. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so after the Voting Rights Bill was passed on August 6, 1965,
1965.
they
Right.
felt that the civil rights phase was over. Now it's the second phase of true realization of equality and the acquisition of power. That's what the stated goal was of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So Dr. King gave speeches like the next stop, the North. They were moving the struggle from the South. He even addressed his organization in November of that year in Frogmore, South Carolina. They went to the Sea Islands because King was pro-black and where they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have their work. So he gives us an address to his organization about the second phase. And also, you might can find online perhaps the speech he gave, "The Crisis in Civil Rights." This was in July 7th of 1967. But not only that, but guess what? The Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1965, their theme, the conference theme in 65 was human rights, basic issues, the Grand Alliance. Then they doubled down in 1966. The theme was human rights, the continuing struggle. Not only that, Dr. King in his December 10th, 1960. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about speeches. December 10th, 1965. That speech he gave at International Human Rights Day is one of his most important political speeches, where King said that I will quote King. He gave this speech in New York City. He said that we live in an era in which the issue of human rights is the central question confronting all nations. They're not dealing with civil rights anymore. If that's not enough, his press conference in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
January 7th, 1966, he said, "We're raising the question of human rights for those that have been denied these rights by the structures of our society." He's focusing exclusively on human rights. One of his most important speeches, another one, there's so many I can go
Mm-hmm.
on, but the
And
bottom line is one
go,
of his
go ahead and
last.
talk. I'll be right back. I'll be right back in just
Okay.
a minute. Go ahead and talk.
Okay. So one of Dr. King's last speeches was remaining awake through a great revolution. And he gave this speech March 31st, 1968, just before he was assassinated. One of his last major speeches, remaining awake through a great revolution. So what Dr. King said in the speech is he emphasized the revolutionary nature of the times that they were in. Now remember, this is all after 1965. He's not dealing with civil rights anymore. He's dealing exclusively with human rights. So what King says in the speech is that he explained the revolutionary era that they were in, but he always talked about a triple revolution. So for him, it was a revolution in technology, it was a revolution in weaponry, and then the third aspect of this triple revolution was a revolution in human rights. And this is what King was emphasizing. So technology, weaponry, and human rights. And this is why remaining awake through a great revolution is a very, very important speech for King, because he's highlighting human rights and the revolutionary nature of what was happening. So this is why King is shifting. He's embracing human rights. And so he consistently focused on this second period. And this is a different King that emerged in the first
Right.
period. And this is what Taylor Branch leaves out. There's no possible way that a man spending any time reading King's materials could miss that. But he knows that the dream
Right.
sells. And if you start talking about King, the activist, then you're going to ruffle some feathers and the dream is not as palatable. So this is why he's feigning and pretending like oh my God, I would like to get your phone number. As if he don't know. Are you kidding
Right.
me? And this is everywhere. One source after another. He's talking as a leader how to get people to understand that we've accomplished our goals in the first phase. Now it's the second phase. And he also warned white people. He said there's not going to be any bargain
Mm-hmm.
rates. There's not going to be any bargain race in the second period. You're going to have to give up something. He said, in fact, to be able to take down segregation signs, he said that kind of assuaged the guilt of white people. You, so they didn't look so savage as he said. Yeah, he talked about spectacular savages. Oh yeah, he did.
Exactly.
And white supremacy. Yeah, he did very much so. So human rights and this shifting is something that was very central to Dr. King's work. And so we had, I'm looking at the channel. I don't see anybody that's put in the books yet. But we got one. So that was mentioned by Brother Michael.
Yep.
So there's 4 other ones.
Yep. List the names of the books that Dr. King wrote. Okay. And I'm going to bring up your website here as well so people can check that out also. I have 2 of his books here, but I'm not going to show the other one. But yeah, list the names of the books that Dr. King wrote. Because when the slides that I showed for my presentation, brother, I showed those at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History here in Detroit. And I do not get asked to speak at a lot of Dr. King Day celebrations. Like, I ain't get asked to speak at any this year because I'm dealing with the revolutionary Dr. King. I'm not dealing with this fictitious Dr. King that people have manufactured to make white people feel comfortable with the oppression of African Americans. I don't do that. I don't do that at all. I want to, and here's something else that I showed. There's another reason why I don't get invited to speak. Okay, so I mentioned the book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed: How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible, by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. Okay, and I have the book right here as well. Now, it's important for people to understand who Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. is. Okay, so he was a activist with SNCC, operating in rural Mississippi for 5 years, organizing African Americans to vote, and you register to vote, things of this nature, right? And so he was there, and he taught. I saw an interview on News One Now with Roland Martin that Roland did with him, and he's breaking down how anytime the activists stayed, African American activists especially, stayed at somebody's house, the Black people's house in the South, in Mississippi, there was always a gun in the house. There was a gun over the fireplace or on the nightstand, things like this. And he said the first day they got down there, the first day, because most of these activists were coming from the North, okay, and they're coming down to Mississippi, especially during Freedom Summer, 1964. He said the first day that they got down there, he said the Black people in Mississippi told him and the others, he said, we know you're nonviolent, but we're not. And we're not going to let these white people kill you, because they knew what white people were capable of. Mississippi was the state that had the most number of lynchings from 1882 to about 1968, about 581 lynchings. Mississippi was the state that had the most number of lynchings. But if we look at this here, I want to go to this. This deals with and I hopefully, let's see, is it showing on the screen? Let's go to this again. This is an excerpt from This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed: How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. Okay, so get this from your local African American book dealer. If you can't get it from them, then get it from somewhere else. Here's an excerpt from the book. Visiting Martin Luther King Jr. during the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. So that's 1955, 1956. Journalist William Worthy almost sat on a loaded pistol. Now, you talked about this earlier in our conversation, Professor Manu and Ampim. Quote, just for self-defense, Dr. King assured him. Just for self-defense, end quote, Dr. King assured him. It was not the only weapon Dr. King kept for such a purpose. One of his advisors remembered the Reverend's Montgomery, Alabama home as an arsenal, quote unquote, an arsenal. Like Dr. King, many ostensibly, that means on the surface, many ostensibly, quote unquote, nonviolent civil rights activists embraced their constitutional right to self-protection. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of them. Yet this crucial dimension of the Afro-American freedom struggle has been long ignored. In This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. recovers this history, describing the vital role that armed self-defense has played in the survival and liberation of Black communities. As one of my teachers, Professor James Small, told me personally, he said, if it had not been for Negroes with guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement, because it was oftentimes African Americans with guns protecting the civil rights activists when they're doing their nonviolent protests and things of this nature. Drawing on his experiences in the civil rights movement and giving voice to its participants, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. lays bare the paradoxical relationship between the nonviolent civil rights struggle and the long history and importance of African Americans taking up arms to defend themselves against white supremacist violence. All right, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I was a member of an organization that some of these activists were, some of the great activists, they were part of the same organization. So I've talked to Brother Mukasa
Yeah,
Dada,
me too.
who was
Yeah.
Willie Ricks. So when they introduced the Black Power slogan in the movement in June of 1966, this was already a phrase. So SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they used the phrase Black Power for Black people. So they were already using that phrase, but what Brother Willie Ricks of Mikasa did, he shortened it from for Black Power for Black people to just Black Power. So he coordinated with Stokely Carmichael, who was later Kwame Ture, of exactly what time during it was the Meredith March Against Fear in Mississippi. That became the Black Power March, because here's where the movement split. So when James Meredith was walking down the highway, he was shot and some white supremacists. And so the bottom line is, So
I'm just showing everybody. You go ahead and keep talking.
Yeah. So what happens is that whenever someone was attacked, the rule was always the same, that the SCLC, the NAACP, the CORE, SNCC, all of these organizations would come together and rally behind anybody that needed help. And they had different principles that they used throughout the 50s and early 60s. That is, it would always be that it would be focused on supposedly integration, meaning black and white together. Anybody can participate, and the goals were to so-called integrate to society, then that it would be nonviolent, without weapons. So they agreed to that up until that march. With that march, when the young white activists who have been participating in CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, when they participated, the black activists said, "No, y'all need to go. This is our struggle. We ain't nonviolent no more. We're gonna carry guns, and this is our struggle." So what started as the James Meredith March Against Fear turned into the Black Power March. It's very important to know that, because that's where the movement split. So when the young activists in CORE and SNCC, when they begin to radicalize the struggle and they begin to use not black and white together and we shall overcome, no, they changed that. They didn't say we shall overcome, we shall overrun. And they said shotgun shells, and they had a jingle about that they will be shooting back. So when the movement split, guess who left? John Lewis left. He was not. John Lewis left the very organization that he helped to found, which was SNCC. And so all of the NAACP left, and they left. The NAACP left. The more conservative people in CORE, they left. The more conservative people in SNCC, they left. They stayed in the civil rights era where it was black and white together, everyone focused together on integration, no weapons, no self-defense. That's what their position was. But guess what? The young activists in CORE, the young activists in SNCC, and all of SCLC and Dr. King, guess what? They went left. They moved further and further left with the movement. And so King stayed on the Black Power March. And you can see footage of a reporter. On the one hand, he's interviewing Brother Stokely Carmichael, who was head of SNCC at the time. What do you think about the use of weapons and with a lot of the white students and white activists not being able to participate anymore? Why are you using the word Black Power, the phrase Black Power? So Brother Kwame was Stokely Carmichael. He's given his statements. Then the reporter would then turn to Dr. King. Well, Dr. King, what do you think about that?
Right.
So as they were walking down the highway, they are having an ideological discussion. And you can see that King did not favor the term Black Power because it sounded too much like white power. He favored Black consciousness or Black equality. But guess what? Days later, on the same march, you have Dr. King talking about, guess what? Black power. So he began to use black, but his criticism was that black power should not just be used as a slogan,
Right.
and that's it.
Right.
He wanted it to be a plan and program, and that's why King used his maturity. He used his insight to challenge the young activists to not just use a slogan, but to make it real and relevant. And that's when King stayed with the march, and he began to not only embrace Black Power, but defend the Black Power advocates. But those who stayed on the civil rights side, they condemned the Black Power advocates. They even took out an ad and did a press statement in October of 1966. Rustin and Whitney Young and the rest of the big six, big seven leaders to do what? Condemn Black Power. So when the reporters asked them, well, what does Dr. King think about your statement against the Black Power movement? And they said, well, King is with us. King was not with them at all. So this came out on October 14th, 1966, for these people to condemn Black Power and the Black Power advocates. And King agonized over this. You know what Dr. King said? He was upset that they tried to bring him into their anti-Black Power position. So King was talking with his advisors. He said, how can I have any credibility being among these? And he called them Mickey Mouse Negroes because he didn't respect them. He didn't respect them. So on October 17th, 3 days later in 1966, Dr. King took out an ad in the New York Times to, as it said, clarify his own position, that he does not condemn Black Power. He said that this is something that emerged out of real concrete issues and conditions in racist America. And so King did not agree with these folks, but the movement split in 66. And that's when Dr. King became an enemy, not to just a lot of people in the general public or the media or the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, but to the Black civil rights leaders who were uncomfortable because Dr. King was not only internationalizing the struggle and embracing now publicly liberation movements out, in different places in the world, but now he's embracing Black Power, and there was no room for those earlier white activists who were only focused on getting laws changed. But now this is a new phase in the struggle. So the Black activists said, no, we're going to do this alone. And the bottom line is, you're absolutely right. They had their weapons, they had their guns. He said, these white folks are vicious. Any place that someone was meeting was suspect to be shot up, whether it was a house, whether it was a church, it didn't matter what it was. So they always had their weapons. So when white folks would come by shooting, they would shoot. No one was really locked into some nonviolent philosophy like that. The stick activists was not having it like that. But the bottom line is that the Deacons for Defense, during this Black Power March in June of 66, there was one of the marchers who passed away during this Meredith March. And so they wanted Dr. King to preach the eulogy, but guess what? He wouldn't. You know why? He had to wait for the Deacons of Defense to help to be the security for him to go into the Mississippi Delta and preach that eulogy, because these folks will shoot you from anywhere, from a rooftop, from a tree branch, or anywhere else. But it was the Deacons for Defense that King waited on to provide the personal security before he would go into that Delta and preach the eulogy. So that's one of the most defining marches, why that Meredith March turned into the Black Power March, and it was the brother Mukasa Dada, or who at the time was Willie Rick. And somebody wrote a book, is that he's coming to start riots. He's coming to start riots because he was like a preacher,
right?
So he was like, so they gave him the title of Rev because he can rev people up. He's like a minister that can motivate people, drive people, and that's what it was about. So folks should know this larger context about Dr. King as an activist and why the FBI and the government and mayors to different cities were so concerned, because they could not move Dr. King from his lobby. And what folks should also know is that a group of people that were some of the greatest enemies of Dr. King were Black civil rights leaders, because they were uncomfortable that white folks were uncomfortable, because not a big deal. If you stay in your little area and you do what we allow you to do, which is stay in the South and just talk about quote unquote Negro
Right.
business. They allowed that. But when King began to nationalize the struggle, when he went to Chicago in 1966 and said he was there to implement Black Power, and then began to internationalize the struggle, he always saw this going back to the 1950s. He wrote a essay in 1956 called "The Birth of a New
Mm-hmm.
Age," and in his "Birth of the New Age" article, he's talking about a revolutionary age that had emerged. And so he saw this as a historical time that he can play an important role. And that's why King is embracing Ghana and embracing different countries in Africa. This is why he embraces Jamaica and other places. And so King made the civil rights Negroes uncomfortable because white folks began to condemn King and said, Dr. King, don't you think that you're talking about all these international issues? Don't you think that's hurting the budget of your organization? He said, excuse me, sir, you don't know me.
Right.
I don't worry about what's in the budget of my organization. And he goes on to school people about what a man of faith and a man of character actually focuses on. And this is what caused a permanent split in the movement. Now, there was always tension, but they still worked in
Sure.
unity. As Dr. King would say, you can have unity without uniformity. But in 66, there was no more unity because the civil rights folks did not agree. They wanted nothing to do with what they considered to be violence. No, it's not violence, it's self-defense. Then King then said to hell with it. And this is why King weighed it very carefully as he began to increasingly condemn and criticize his own government. And this is why King, the man and activist, is not that well known because he became an uncomfortable figure when he began to condemn the American government, when he began to condemn the structure that kept people in poverty. And he questioned everything about the country. And this is why he's talking about a human rights revolution taking place. And he always talked about the triple
Right.
evils of militarism, materialism, and racism. He talks about these triple evils on a regular basis. People began to hate Dr. King. Yeah, I know they're giving him a holiday now, but he was the most hated man in America, and the FBI was concerned about making sure that this man did not continue in his lobby. And if someone doesn't know that, then that's by design. But we have to go to the record, we have to go to the text and look at the actual details. Stop quoting David Garrow and Taylor Branch, and now you got Jacob Ing, these outside white guys, as if they're expert. Look at Jacob Ing's book, King. What does he call it? King, a biography. That book is as plain as possible. I looked through it. I saw, you kidding me? Here you got another major book that leaves out the major things that King was focused on.
Right.
It's amazing. So just by omission, it's a distortion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go to this here. Now, this comes from the SNCC digital library. Okay. And this is about the, hold on, let me show this again. This is about the March Against Fear. Let me flip back over to this. This is about the March Against Fear, June 1966, and James Meredith. Okay, because James Meredith gets shot on the march, and then it's going to be civil rights activists that come into Mississippi to finish the march. It started out as a one-person march. Okay.
Right.
So this right here, I'm just going to highlight this. On Sunday, June 5th, 1966, James Meredith had just stepped off U.S. Highway 51 to begin a 220-mile trek through Mississippi. His purpose, he told the handful of reporters there, was to challenge the all-pervasive, overriding fear still dominant among Black Mississippians when they attempted to register to vote. He, more than many, knew about fear and danger. In 1962, James Meredith had become the first African American to enroll in the University of Mississippi. We know Medgar Evers tried to do it some years earlier and was blocked, but Medgar Evers helped James Meredith enroll at the University of Mississippi. Mob violence and murder greeted his enrollment. Okay, so people read the rest of this here dealing with James Meredith and the March Against Fear. And you're going to have the activists, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and others. And I think we lost Professor Manu and Ampim. He should be back in a minute. They're going to get arrested. And they when they come out of jail, Kwame Ture gives this speech and he drops the phrase Black Power. And he talks about, we want Black Power, we want Black Power. And I encourage people, I was watching Eyes on the Prize today. I have the box, I have the, on DVD, the box set of the initial Eyes on the Prize that deals with like 1954 through 1965. But there was a second Eyes on the Prize series that came out years later that dealt with about 1965. Then it dealt with the assassination of Dr. King, election of Richard Nixon, and it goes through the 1980s. And they interview, this one interviews Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. It interviews Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, two co-founders of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And this one, that second series, got into the armed self-defense. It talked about that because the first series didn't deal with that at all. And the first series only had Malcolm X in there for about 90 seconds, whereas the second series dealt more with that information, armed self-defense, Malcolm X, all of that. Go ahead and comment on that, brother, and then I'm going to take people to your webpage because we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted. Yes, sir. Okay. I just want to show folks just a couple of things they may not be familiar with. Go ahead. So here's one book here. He's coming to start riots.
Okay.
And you see, brother, brother Stokely Kwame Ture, right. And then you see Dr. King, and that is none other than Mukasa Dada as well.
Right.
So this is the one who rallied people together, and they couldn't stop him. Yeah. So that's him. So I would say, pick this book up to help you understand what happened, folks. And by the way, even though Kwame Ture, who was the chair of SNCC, is more popular, it was actually Mukasa Dada who was using Black Power, but it was more effective. So he and Kwame Ture decided at the right day when Kwame would drop the phrase Black Power. So he would say, what do you want? The people say, Black Power. What do you want? Black Power. So they introduced that in mid-June 1966. Here's another one. We will shoot back. So there's a lot of sources that really puts this in context. And one thing that folks should know is that you do not see King outside of this, because these white folks, these white nationalists were very vicious, and King made sure that he had protection around him and on a regular. Otherwise, he would have been, taken out before that. So those are some sources that we need to know. But yeah, I'm sorry, I missed your main question.
Oh, no, I was just saying with the March Against Fear and them dropping the phrase Black Power, which and they, within SNCC, they had already been using the term Black Power, from my understanding. In the second series of Eyes on the Prize, they talk about Willie Rick's Mukasa Dada, and they talk, and Kwame Ture talks about how he was already using that phrase on the ground, priming people for it, getting them to understand that concept so that they were ready for it when Kwame Ture dropped it in the speech when he comes out the jail during the March Against Fear. And when he gives that speech and he drops that phrase, and you're going to have a ideology built around it. It wasn't just a phrase. It was an ideology built around it about Black empowerment and being able to control the politics in your community, being able to control the economics in your community. And then you're going to have in October 1966, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is founded, and they used the Black Panther symbol from the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. They used that as the symbol of their organization, which was a political party. They ran candidates, things of this nature. So a lot of times people look at the Black Panthers and see the black jackets and the berets and the guns, but don't understand, one, they were a political party, two, the programs that they had, sickle cell anemia and breakfast programs and feeding seniors, and then the educational program, educating people politically. Now, there were some things that probably needed more emphasis on African history and things like this, but they were giving people a lot of information and resources that they did not have. Go ahead.
Right. And
Go ahead.
you're right. And this came out of a context where in Alabama, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, they emerged, yes, political party, because in the whole state, you had less than 5 Black people that could
Mm-hmm.
vote at the
In
time in Alabama,
Alabama,
less
yep.
than 5. It just less than
Mm-hmm.
5. They say 2 or 3. So the Democratic Party, their symbol was the rooster,
Mm-hmm.
and the words was Party for White Supremacy. So white supremacy or they say white supremacy. So out of that context, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization chose the Black Panther as a
Right.
symbol. So that's what influenced the Black Panther Party here in Oakland, California, where Huey Newton and Bobby Seale learned about that. But it was a Lowndes County organization. So it was about
Yeah.
power, Black power for Black people. This was the phrase and slogan that SNCC was using before they dropped that line or that call in the movement. And King stayed with the movement. And you see footage of Dr. King begin to say, if we had power, they wouldn't be doing this to them. If we had economic and political power. So we started off being kind of timid to use Black power because he didn't want it to seem like Black supremacy in the sense that it was just the opposite of vicious white supremacy that was associated with violence and lynching. This is why King was a little bit
Right.
hesitant. He said it has to be a program and not a slogan. He said Irish and Italians organize the power. They don't use slogans. So, but King started to use Black power. One of his most important essays, Dr. King's, is Black Power Defined. But let me just share with folks how this begins to emerge. So when people
Oh,
say living the dream, what dream are you talking about? It's a program.
right.
It's a platform that came. So in many ways, so for example, Dr. King said Black Power is a call for the pooling of Black financial resources and to achieve economic security. Then he goes on and said, if Black power means the development of this kind of strength within the Negro community, then it is a quest for basic necessity, legitimate power. Finally, Black power is a psychological call to manhood. He says, Black is beautiful as any other color. And he goes on, he says this is what's important about King. Power is the ability to achieve purpose. And certainly the Negro needs power because this is our problem. We are powerless. We have been powerless economically and politically, and the ghetto itself, in a sense, came into being to keep the Negro in a powerless position. Now, he gives this speech to his staff in Frogmore, South Carolina, back in November of 1966.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, this is what King says, folks: power is not the white man's birthright. It will not be legislated for us and delivered in neat government packages. It is a social force any group can utilize by accumulating its elements in a planned, deliberate campaign to organize it under its own control. This is the plan and program that King was promoting. He said that we can have unity without uniformity.
Yeah.
So for King, it was not just dealing with the Black community only. Now it was a deal with the poor and the least of these and looking at a class struggle. So King said that, look, we have to be more effective and more sophisticated in embracing the labor movement and looking for commonality there and looking for commonality on economic grounds. They already had an economic approach because there was no demonstrations in the South that was not also associated with an economic boycott. There was always an economic boycott of white businesses.
Yes.
Always. Yes, always. And brother, let's check this out.
Go ahead.
Brother Michael.
Go ahead.
To show you the problem we have, folks. I remember a couple years ago, this would have been in Minneapolis with the lynching of George Floyd in May 2020. It was on CNN, and they had Martin Luther King III, and it was one of the Black Lives activists, I think, for Baltimore.
Okay.
So the commentator asked Martin Luther King III about the strategy during the so-called civil rights movement. He said, well, one of the things that made these demonstrations very effective was the economic boycott to cripple the local economy if people continue with business as usual and white supremacy. Exactly. So after he explained that was one of the most effective components, the Black Lives Matter young guy said in just an instant, we don't need to do all that. They just need to just stop killing Black folks. What? Are you kidding me? Here it is, young guy who don't know nothing.
Don't read.
That this is exactly, don't you're disrespectful. He's telling you exactly. So what did Martin Luther King say? He didn't say, he said, well, That's what happened. And he just let it alone because it's on national
Martin Luther King the
TV.
third, the
You know
son,
why?
not the father. Martin Luther King the third. I just want people to understand
The
who you're
third.
talking about. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah. Martin Luther King the third. It's just a few years
yep.
ago. He's explaining why they were effective in crippling the economy and making them bow down in Birmingham. Well, sorry, they didn't call it Birmingham. We were talking about
Birmingham.
the white supremacists. Birmingham,
Yes.
Alabama, because they would bomb any
Yep.
place. Any place that was a meeting place would be bombed. So it was Birmingham, Alabama, you know. But there's economic agenda all the time, and that's why when they had meetings, whether if it was in Birmingham, they went to A.G. Gasket,
Yes.
and because he was a successful black business person, he had not only the motel, but he had other businesses. He had a radio station, so they would stay at his properties, and they would make sure they should help support his businesses. Also, when the SCLC had retreats, I honestly, when I was doing the research, I didn't know that Frogmore, South Carolina, I did not know it was part of the South Sea Islands, where you got the traditional Gullah and Geechee. I didn't know that at the
Yep.
time.
South Carolina, Georgia.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know that. So it's right off the coast there. But that's the kind of focus that they always had to help to build the community financially and economically. And this was always a part of their focus. So this is part of the agenda that King is laying out in Where Do We Go From Here that gets missed because he's laying out. Like, the title of the book says it. Where do we go from here? He's laying out. And by the way, his last birthday, he guess what, he had breakfast at 8, and guess what Dr. King is doing? He's meeting with he met with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. He met with Jesse Jackson and others to figure out what was their plans. That's what he did on his birthday, his last birthday in January of '68. So we can do the same.
Yep.
Is always focused on organization. So there's much to do and much to learn about Dr. King, but we have to go to the record. And unless I missed it, I didn't see anybody putting any other books in the chat.
Yep. Nope. No. Let me do this. I'm gonna go to your website. I'm gonna do some shameless plugging for the African History Network. Go to your website. I'm gonna go to your website also, show that, and then I want you to talk about Dr. King's assassination was orchestrated by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, because we mentioned it earlier, but this is one of the bullet points that you wanted to talk about as well. So I want to make sure we get to that. And also, I pulled something up while you were breaking all this history down. Is it now, those that watch me on the African History Network show, those that see me every Friday on Roland Martin Unfiltered, you've heard me say a number of times, and those that take my online history classes, you've heard me say a number of times, your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Okay, so a lot of people ask, well, why did they need a Civil Rights Act of 1964? They had the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Why do they need a Voting Rights Act of 1965? Okay, we can look back at the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. Okay, that rewrote the Mississippi State Constitution and imposed poll taxes, literacy tests. And also it disenfranchised, it imposed a felony disenfranchisement law where if you were convicted of a felony, you lost your right to vote for life. Okay. And they were specifically targeting African-American men with this law, because African-American women basically, couldn't vote at this time because this was before the 19th Amendment of 1920. A poll tax, for those that don't know, meant it was a tax. It was something that you had to pay to be able to register to vote. It may have been $2 or something like that, but if you were a sharecropper, okay, that's a lot of money. Okay, so what happened was, this was called the Mississippi Plan. Now this comes from the Zen Education Project. There's some different sources on this, and there's an article from the Washington Post that I show on this that talks about we came here to exclude the Negro, because that's what Solomon Saladin Calhoun said, who was the white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention. He talked about why they were there. He said, we came here to exclude the Negro. But what happened was, what Mississippi did was called the Mississippi Plan. And that was copied by other Southern states, these former Confederate states that rewrote their state constitutions to impose poll taxes, literacy tests, in some cases, property ownership requirements to be able to vote, grandfather clause in the case of Louisiana, 1898, but South Carolina, 1895. So this can be seen in the state constitutions with the similar voting suppression statutes adopted by South Carolina, 1895. That's where the Civil War began in 1861. Okay, April 12, 1861, South Carolina. Louisiana, 1898. North Carolina, 1900. Alabama, you talked about Alabama, 1901. So the segregation that our ancestors were dealing with in Alabama, that was written into the state constitution. Virginia, 1901, Georgia, 1908, Oklahoma, 1910. Now, in Florida, in 1868, when Florida rewrites their state constitution after the Civil War ends, after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, December 6, 1865, when Georgia becomes the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment, and this is what legally ends chattel slavery. In Florida, they rewrite their state constitution to impose a felony disenfranchisement law. So if you commit a felony, you lose your right to vote for life. They said that they were doing this to prevent what they call a Negro legislature, because African Americans made up 48% of the state population in Florida in 1868 as a result of slavery. So they're trying to lock African Americans out of political power. This was 2 years before the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1870, which gave the right, well, protected the right to vote for African American men. Okay, so you've got to understand this background history of why these movements happened, why these laws had to be put in place. The Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act of 1968, things of this nature. Okay, now and then let's see here. Okay, we've got that, and then I want to show people this here. Oh, for those that think all this history is in the past, okay? For those that think this was ancient history a long time ago, Professor Manu and Ampim and I, we both teach ancient history. This ain't ancient history. I'm trying to tell you, okay? And to prove to you this is not ancient history, how many of you all have seen the TV show The Jeffersons? Okay, George and Wheezy moving on up. Well, Mother Jefferson was portrayed by veteran actress Zara Cully. Zara Cully. Zara Cully dies in 1978, and they wrote that into the script. Zara Cully was born in 1892. Zara Cully was born 3 years before Frederick Douglass died. She was born before Booker T. Washington died in 1915, who was a former slave. She was born before Harriet Tubman died in 1913, who was a former slave. She was born 27 years after the Civil War ended and after chattel slavery ended. So most likely, she probably grew up knowing former slaves. This is not ancient history. But I want to show this right here. This deals with tying all this history to politics. Okay. The felony disenfranchisement law that was written into the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. Does anybody know when that law was overturned? That law was overturned in 2023. Okay, not 2023 BC. I'm talking about 2023. I'm talking about 2 years ago. Look at this article here from WashingtonPost.com. Okay, Jim Crow era lifetime ban on felons voting is unconstitutional, court says. August 5th, 2023. And this is written by Shara Avi Yona for the Washington Post. Mississippi's lifetime ban on certain felons voting constitutes cruel and unusual punishment and violates the 8th Amendment, a federal appeals court ruled Friday, this is in August 2023, potentially paving the way for tens of thousands to regain their voting rights. A panel of Fifth Circuit judges ruled 2-1 in favor of the plaintiffs, writing the section writing that the section at issue is Mississippi State Constitution, quote, in Mississippi State's Constitution, quote, ensures that they will never be fully rehabilitated, continues to punish them beyond the term their culpability requires and serves no protective function to society, end quote. Okay, so that felony disenfranchisement law dates back to 1890. And it just got overturned in 2023. And right here in the article, it says the clause dates back to Mississippi's 1890 state constitution, which the state, quote, adopted in reaction to the expansion of Black suffrage. That means Black voting rights and Black people voting, Black men voting, and other political rights during Reconstruction era 1865 to 1877. The ruling notes, the provision applied to felons convicted of crimes that included murder, bribery, theft, and perjury, among other crimes. The plaintiff succeeded using an uncommon legal strategy for voting rights cases, focusing on the Eighth Amendment and its prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Go ahead, Professor Manu, and I'm gonna bring up your website as you talk about this, because I know you want to comment on this.
Well, I'll just kind of add something separate, in that if this was a nation of laws, then there would have been no need for the Black liberation struggle in the 1950s and 60s, because the 14th Amendment was passed and ratified in 1868, which supposedly gave citizenship rights to Black people and by extension everybody else. So if the 14th Amendment was real and relevant, there would have been no need for a civil rights bill almost 100 years later in 1964. And the voting and the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, if this was a nation of laws, it gave at least Black men the right to vote. But state by state, county by county, they took those rights away by the grandfather clause, that if your grandfather couldn't vote, didn't vote, you can't vote, a poll tax, or a literacy clause. You had to read parts of the Constitution and interpret it. I teach U.S. history, and the vast majority of people, not just regular students, but people in general, can't interpret the Constitution. But white folks didn't have to do that. But if the 15th Amendment was real and relevant, there would have been no need for a voting rights bill almost 100 years later. So it shows that it's never been a nation of laws at all. People do what they want, when they want, the way they want to do it. So the movement was to make America real and relevant to at least its claims of laws that had been passed a century earlier. And so this is part of the contradiction, you know, but clearly the goal is to keep people suppressed. That's why the 13th Amendment, when somebody told me a while back that slavery is not over, I thought they were talking crazy. But when you really read the 13th Amendment, slavery is illegal unless someone is convicted of a crime. Then slavery is not illegal. It's quite legal. That's why you have people in prison today working for pennies, literally, and they have no choice. They must go out and work. And these corporations are hiring them and exploiting these people for literally pennies a day. Pennies a day.
Right. And I would encourage people to watch the 2-hour interview I did with Dr. Darrell Scott, who used to teach history. He's a history professor and historian. He used to teach at Howard. Now he's at Morgan State University. And we did an in-depth show going into the history of the 13th Amendment prior to that, because the 13th Amendment is based upon what's known as the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That's where the language in the 13th Amendment comes from. And the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is basically what largely abolishes slavery in northern territories, like Michigan, like where I live. That's one of the reasons why Michigan does not have a huge slavery population. Climate and economy had a lot to do with it also. That's part of it, but also the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 as well. So I encourage people to watch that. Now, I'm going to go to your website here, because I want people to support you, and then I'm going to bring up our website for the African History Network, because we need people support as well. So your website is manuampim.com.
Yes, so that's under construction, but yes, it's manuampim.com, and you'll see some new materials on that. And so then the other one, so it's the other one, if you can show advancingtheresearch.org, but manuampim.com. So
Oh
this,
yeah.
it summarizes my primary or firsthand research throughout the U.S. and in dozens of countries around the world in Africana studies. So
Okay.
this chronicles my work, my research. King and my work on King is one aspect of the work, but also advancing the research, we have a lot of material there.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
pulling it up. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm pulling it up now. Advancingtheresearch.com.
But .org.
Now I know you have
But
some
.org.
essays. .org. Okay. I know you have essays at your website. Now, are the essays on the new website or the old one or both?
Both. It's both.
Okay, both. Okay, so I'm gonna bring this up here. Yeah, advancingtheresearch.org as well, because I know you had your essay of a different perspective on the nonviolent tradition, and that was dealing with talked about Dr. King. I printed that up January 19th, 2011 from your website.
Yeah.
And then because I have thousands of articles printed up here in the office, people
Yeah.
just don't know. Okay, so let's see, we've got this here, and then also printed up the one on the Black Power movement. Okay, so advancing the research, and then we've got our mission. So go ahead, go ahead
Yes,
and
if you
walk
go
us through
back up
this.
to the top, there's a drop. Yeah, you can go to event news, for example. It's different
Mm-hmm.
different articles, different things there. Interviews
Okay.
under news, and then some of my work. This is when I was in South Sudan, so I do a lot of field work. When I'm not here, I'm out
Yeah.
in the field quite often, and then also this summer I'm going to be taking people. I'm going to be taking people to Ethiopia and also to Kemet, and after that I'll continue my field research on ancient Kush. So that's the educational tours at the top
Okay.
there uh, as well.
Right.
Yeah. So
Education
folks can
tours.
go to the
Okay.
website, advancingtheresearch.org and manuampim.com. But also I'm on social media. So you can find me. I have a YouTube channel, Professor manuampim.com, and also on Facebook. And I post things in different areas. So, but if somebody wants to reach me, and if you want to be on the email list, you can simply go to advancingtheresearch.org and get on the email list, or you can email me directly at manuampim@gmail, and we'll be glad to get you on the email list to keep you abreast of what's happening. There's always news in Africana studies. So yeah, social media, you can find me
Yep.
Facebook and YouTube.
Contact us. Okay, absolutely. And then also, everybody, you can support the African History Network. Visit our website, africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com. It connects you to our social media. You can register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. We're going to have a new one starting up also in February. And you can, and I'm trying to find this link here. Also, you can support us through PayPal and Cash App. $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, finance the research, pay for all these services that I use. So right here, our social media is right here, and you can register for the online history classes I teach. You can download my lesson plan as well right here for all the class sessions. Download that, and then PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through PayPal. Click right here for the link. There's some fake African History Network Cash App accounts out there. I'm still trying to get shut down. They've been stealing money from us. Ours is $ the AHN show, SHOW. That's why I had to create this graphic here, because people were reporting some fake ones to me. And then paypal.me/the AHN show. Okay, now, Professor Manu, I know one of the topics you wanted to talk about, we're going to wrap up with this here. Dr. King's assassination, orchestrated by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, talk about this, please, because we know the U.S. government was involved somehow, but you have probably more information than the average person does.
Yeah, it's a long story. So I would just say concisely that the FBI had a under the counterintelligence program, they had a Get King campaign. That's what the focus was. So from 1962 till his assassination 6 years later in 1968, the FBI under the director J. Edgar Hoover, who hated Dr. King, wanted to take King out of his lobby. They wanted to take him out of his work. So everywhere they had microphones in the SCLC office in Atlanta. Other places they had microphones. The lines at the office were wiretapped. His home lines were wiretapped so they can listen in. The FBI had live agents like a black student, James Harrison. So they needed live. He was dealing with a county when he was there. And so they had live agents inside. They even had the famous photographer Ernest Withers, who also was identified as an FBI agent.
Ernest Withers.
Okay. Okay.
So that came out a few years. That came out just a few years ago about Ernest Withers, right?
It came out. Yeah, it came out. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. So yeah. So that came out. That first came out in 2010. Which is long after the movement. So Withers was he was an informant, and but they had so much surveillance on King that it was so tight that he couldn't even wiggle. This is how tight the surveillance was on King, and ultimately the FBI wanted to get King to commit suicide. They tried to break up his family. The FBI leaked all kind of stories to try to destroy his character. J. Edgar Hoover said he's one of the lowest types in the country. He called him a scoundrel and that he was totally immoral, they claim. They sent a letter to try to get him to commit suicide to break his family up, and none of that worked. So eventually what happened with King's assassination in Memphis is he was helping the sanitation workers because they didn't have a union, and they had, when it was raining and storming, they had to try to get shelter in the back of a garbage truck. And they were killed back there. So King went in to help with that cause, and he was at the plush Holiday Inn, and the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, as usual, leaked the story to say that King was a hypocrite. He's telling the black community to boycott white businesses, but he's staying at the plush Rivermount Holiday Inn. Why don't he be more honest and not hypocritical and go to the black-owned Lorraine Motel? So King did not want a public battle over that, so he did go to Lorraine Motel. The problem was he was downstairs. No one knows who it was to this day, but somebody went in and said that Dr. King, I wanted Dr. King's men, they said, and he does not like the downstairs room. He wants the upstairs scenic room with the scenic view. That's the room in which he was assassinated in front of. And the day of his assassination, April 4th, 1968, that day, almost all the security from 10 people was down to 2. And so Frank Holloway, who was orchestrating this, they made sure he didn't have security. One of the men that was to protect Dr. King was Detective Riddick. Detective Riddick was taken off duty against his will. He wanted to be there. They made sure that as the assassination took place, that Riddick was not there. And he gave the whole story of exactly how this went down. Made no sense whatsoever. The bottom line is James Earl Ray did not and could not have killed Dr. King. But what we do know is the FBI lured him to the location. They moved him upstairs to where he was assassinated. And when he was assassinated, the FBI agents in Atlanta were excited. They were jumping for joy and said, they got Zorro. They got Zorro. They called him Zorro, which means fox in Spanish. And so you look at the whole scenario, and it's nothing but the FBI and Hoover who wanted to make sure that he was assassinated at that time, because what King was planning and what the movement activists were planning was the Poor People's Campaign to completely shut down the U.S. government, that there'll be no vehicular traffic going into Washington, D.C. There'll be no business as usual, that they were going to call in and jam up all the phone lines and literally cripple operations. And they would do that in order to get a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. and the Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged was to be in the billions of dollars. And if that didn't work, then the next phase was to dislocate cities all across America to make sure that there would be no business as usual and to force the government's hand. Then Dr. King said to give us a few months. He's talking to the black power advocates that he thought he was secretly meeting with. It wasn't so secret, but they thought it was. He said, look, give us 3 months to try to see if this method would work. If it doesn't work, you can use any method that you think would solve the problem. And the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover said that Dr. King is irresponsible. He's going to create a bloodbath in Washington, D.C. because they had set up 3,000 people that were going to camp out in Washington, D.C. with tents and not leave until a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged was passed in the billions. And it should be, he said, guaranteed income for people or guaranteed job. And the government was not willing to do that. So the thing was they had to move King out of his lobby. But he said that this was the last desperate attempt for nonviolence. It's not a coincidence that he was assassinated when he was assassinated and that the FBI was all over this. These documents are going to come out, although I looked at thousands of them, but there's secret documents in the National Archives that will come out in January of 2027 that will give even more insight about this. But make no mistake about it. We talk about a holiday now, but if people pick up where Dr. King left off, it ain't going to be a holiday. It would be some trouble. And folks need to know that the government was concerned about King and his efforts to radicalize the movement to the next level to get results.
Absolutely. And even if it's not some trouble, we should spend the day studying Dr. King and the movement and getting the truth, not this watered down Santa Clausification of Dr. King, not this nonsense that they flood us with. We should use that day to research. Now today, part of today, I was watching Eyes on the Prize. I do that every Dr. King day, and during Black History Month, I go through and watch the whole series of Eyes on the Prize. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I have it on DVD. Okay, I bought the box set. All right. Okay. Well, look, brother. We appreciate you coming on today, sharing this valuable information with us. Everybody visit his website, advancingtheresearch.org, advancingtheresearch.org. Support Professor Manu Ampim, because brothers like he and I, we don't get funding from billionaires and millionaires and things like that. We don't get that. We get probably more opposition than anything. So, and do you get invited to speak at Dr. King Day celebrations?
Well, I told the folks on Dr. King's birthday that, I appreciate you all reading I Have a Dream speech. There was some errors and some omissions.
Right.
You're probably not going to invite me back, so let me lay it out. The real Dr. King, the man and activist versus King the myth. Yeah, they do, but, in those kind of corporate settings and academia, they like the fun, soft events. But I know one thing, a lot of those executives and high up administrators were a little bit uncomfortable. What I did notice that they were highly attentive, and I saw a lot of positive head nodding. That doesn't mean they're going to invite me back,
right?
But it does mean that something sunk in, because documentation beats conversation every day of the week. So yes, brother. Right. So I appreciate it, and and so folks can look me up. Also, thank you, Sister Ray. Yeah, my book, A History of African Civilizations. Yeah, History of African Civilizations. So you can get that. So it's not only a textbook, but it's also for the community as well. And it's a lot of my work on ancient classical African civilizations, Kush, Nubia, Kemet, and the other ones on the African continent. So
and they can get that from your website. They can get that from your website.
They can get it from our website. If you go to Amazon to get it, there's no problem. You can get A History of African Civilizations from Amazon, but I won't sign it.
Okay.
You can get it there. So go to our website so we can cut out the middle person, for sure.
Exactly. Well, look, brother, it's always good to have you on. I think people learned more today about Dr. King they probably learned in the last 10 years. So once again, and the phrase he just used, that's where I get proper documentation ends all conversation. I modified his phrase and made it my own. That's where that comes from, Professor Manu and Pim. I say proper documentation ends all conversation. All right, brother. You have a good day, brother. Hotep. Peace.
You too. Hotep. All right, peace.
All right. All right, stand by, everybody. Okay, so that was Professor Manu and Pim. We always enjoy having that brother on. You see, he's a wealth of knowledge. Okay, that brother's a wealth of knowledge. All right, a couple things. First of all, I want to get to some breaking news, some new developments here. But also, if you like this type of information, if you learned anything today, please financially support the African History Network. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. Okay, because I don't have millionaires and billionaires behind me supporting me. I don't get invited usually to speak at Dr. King Day celebration. Nobody called me to speak for Dr. King Day. Somebody has called me for Black History Month. Nobody called me to speak for Kwanzaa. I got probably more in-depth information dealing with Kwanzaa, the African origins of Kwanzaa, things of this nature. But I was going to talk about Project 2025 and what to prepare for 2025. I was going to incorporate that into my Kwanzaa presentation. Nobody called me to speak at Kwanzaa celebrations anyway either. I can't figure that one. Well, I can figure it out, but we're not going to go there. So you can support us, and also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So if you like this type of information that we deal with here at the African History Network, register for the online history classes that I teach. Right now, it's on Saturdays. It's Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, we deal with thousands of years of history, what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Also, my lectures in digital download format are here as well. But this class, we do thousands of years of history, what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Click right here, register here. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. The class has evolved immensely since 2017. Okay, so we do there are 200 slides, over 200 slides in the class. I put together all the slides. There are 80 to 100 articles that we reference in the class, 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of the books. I show you excerpts on the screen. Also, the video clips that I share of interviews I've done with people, historians, and some of my teachers like Professor James Small, Professor Kaba Kamene, Anthony Browder, Renoka Rashidi, and others. You can use this information with your children. I would say the content is PG-13. Okay. So it's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing, anything like that. You can download the lesson plan here. So we have a laid out lesson plan for each class session. All right. So we deal with thousands of years of history, what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. You can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App. You want to do $5, $10, $15, $25, $100. That definitely helps us keep financing the research and stay on the air, keep broadcasting. And then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Here's our link right here. My lectures, we have them in digital download format and on DVD. So when you scroll down, we have that information here also. Right here. We have a bundle pack on my lectures, 15 lecture download bundle pack. That's on sale, $75, I think it is right now. This is African History Awakens the African Mind from Mental Death. You get 15 of my lectures here. You can get it on DVD or in download format. You can also email me through the website if you have any questions. And then we have my presentations here in we have them here in DVD or digital download format also. Okay, some of my presentations here as well. All right, now let me go to this. Let me go to this breaking news story here. You know, I warned you. First of all, I did not watch the inauguration today. I call it a white supremacist wet dream come true. I ain't watched that bullshit. Okay. And if you saw me on Roland Martin Unfiltered, I think I already said I wasn't going to watch it. But as I explained to people, and you had some people who wanted to be simple Simons and not vote. And I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I sure as hell ain't stupid. I can see who's an existential threat to African Americans. Now I have problems with some Democrats and some policies, but I know I know the MAGA death cult. Okay, I understand that. I know who had an insurrection on January 6th, 2021. Okay, I know who tried to overthrow the government. I know who's convicted of 34 felony counts. All right. So I want to go to this here because Donald Trump has done a lot of damage so far since he's been in office. And he just took the oath of office today. Let's look at this here from CNN.com. If you haven't been paying attention to the news, and this next 4 years, you're going to really need the information that we provide for you at the African History Network. Okay, so Mr. Law and Order, Donald Trump, who says he loves America and he's going to make America great again. Now, I want you to tell me what period of time you want to go back to when America was so great, and great for who, okay? Trump, and this is from CNN. I hate the way CNN does all this. It doesn't populate the way I want it. Trump commutes sentences of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers leaders as he pardons over 1,000 January 6 U.S. Capitol rioters. This is from Monday, January 20th, 2025. Okay, so this is what he did. Okay, these domestic terrorists that tried to overthrow the government. Now, yes, you had people who had different charges. You had some people who the only crime was trespassing. Okay, well, if I remember correctly, that's just a misdemeanor. All right, that's not a violent crime. They just trespass. You had other people breaking out windows. You had 140 police officers assaulted. 140 police officers assaulted. I thought this was supposed to be the party of law and order. Okay, so let's look at this here from NBCnews.com, because the way CNN, their page populates, I want to show you all of this, and they keep trying to show the ad here. Let's go to this one here from NBCnews.com. Trump pardons roughly 1,500 criminal defendants charged in the January 6th Capitol attack. The sweeping pardons would mark the beginning of the end of one of the largest investigations in FBI history. Now, keep in mind, I told you this was going to happen. And I've read a lot of Project 2025, and what's about to happen in America, just like he signed an executive order today to end DEI programs in the federal government, all that's laid out in Project 2025. Donald Trump said Monday he was issuing roughly 1,500 pardons and commuting the sentences of 6 of his supporters in connection with the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, when thousands of them stormed the building amid his false claims that the 2020 presidential election was rigged against him. And he's still lying to this day. There were about 62 lawsuits filed, and Trump and his cronies lost 61 of them. The only one that they won was in Philadelphia, and that dealt with how close poll watchers could be to poll workers counting the votes. That's the only one that they won. Okay, so all the evidence that they claim they had about a stolen election and all of this, when it came time to present the evidence, all of that, they lost, or they didn't present any evidence, any credible evidence at all. And even judges that Trump appointed ruled against him. Federal judges that Trump appointed, they ruled against him as well. Okay. Now, so we have this. He made the remarks after he returned to the White House on Monday evening. This is how elections have consequences. Okay. So this is going to embolden white supremacists, domestic terrorists, all of these people. This is going to embolden them and say, hey, we got our thug back in office. All right. So we can do whatever we want to do. An attorney for Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys leader convicted of seditious conspiracy, told NBC News on Monday that his client was being processed for release from FCI Pollock, a medium security federal prison in Louisiana. Tarrio serving 22 years in federal prison after he was convicted of seditious conspiracy. After he was convicted of seditious conspiracy. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think would happen if President Barack Obama incited Black Lives Matter to storm the U.S. Capitol? Okay, what do you think would happen? Quote, he is being processed out. Attorney Nayeb Hassan said, we do not know what type of clemency he is receiving, end quote. The pardons would fulfill one of Trump's central campaign promises. Immediately after the January 6th attack, Trump sought to distance himself from the attack, saying those who broke the law should be held accountable. But over the next few years, a new narrative emerged, and Trump soon began openly signaling his support for the January 6th rioters, or who I call domestic terrorists, calling them hostages. No, they weren't hostages. They were convicted. They had a trial. They were convicted, or they pled guilty. Okay? No, they're not hostages. The unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol, when the peaceful transfer of power was interrupted because of Donald Trump, was one of the most significant moments in American history. It resulted in the largest FBI investigation ever, with criminal charges against more than 1,500 people and criminal convictions against more than 1,100 defendants. Many low-level riot defendants were sentenced to probationary periods after having been convicted of misdemeanor offenses like unlawful parading inside the Capitol. So this is what I'm saying. Everybody that was there for the January 6th and went into the Capitol, everybody was not violent. You had some people, the only crime they committed was trespassing. You had other people who were thugs assaulting police officers. 140 police officers were assaulted. I thought this was the party of law and order. No, but Republicans, led by Donald Trump, backed the blue until the coup. They backed the blue until the coup. But then they want to come talk to black people about law and order. But hundreds of others who committed serious felonies, such as assaulting police with deadly or dangerous weapons, got significant prison sentences. At the time Trump issued the pardons, there were about 700 defendants who either neither received prison sentences or had already completed their sentences, meaning pardons or commutations would have little practical impact on them beyond restoring voting rights and gun rights for those who were convicted of felonies. More than 600 people were sentenced to incarceration, but only a small fraction of them are still behind bars. Okay, more than 600 people. Let me go back to this here. Hold on, it jumped on me. Let's see. More than 600 people were sentenced to incarceration, but only a small fraction of them are still behind bars. Many of those who are in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons were convicted of violent attacks on police officers protecting the U.S. Capitol during an assault in which January 6 defendants were armed with firearms, stun guns, flagpoles, fire extinguishers, bike racks, batons, a metal whip, office furniture, pepper spray, bear spray, a tomahawk axe, a hatchet, a hockey stick, knuckle gloves, a baseball bat, a massive Trump billboard, Trump flags, a pitchfork, pieces of lumber, crutches, and even an explosive device. Where's the love? It was a love fest. Where's the love? What's love got to do with it? You had some people like Representative Andrew Clyde of Georgia who said, if you something to the effect, if you didn't know any better, just look like a regular tourist day at the Capitol. Really? What type of tourists are these? Are these tourists or terrorists? Which one? Make up your mind. Which one are you talking about? Because I guarantee you, if Black Lives Matter did something like that, or some black activists did like that, there'd be a whole lot of dead bodies out there. I guarantee you that. More than 140 police officers were injured, and several Trump supporters died during the attack, including one who was, several Trump supporters died. I know one that died during the attack. Maybe a few died after. And we know there's 5 police officers that subsequently died afterwards for various reasons, committed suicide, hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, I think it was, something like that, including one who was shot trying to breach the House Speaker's lobby, and another who died in the middle of a brutal battle at the Lower West Tunnel, where some of the worst violence of the day took place. Donald Trump did not speak about January 6th in his inauguration address that I did not watch, in which he said he hoped he would someday be remembered as a quote unquote peacemaker and unifier. Well, he's a unifier amongst white supremacists, but he ain't a unifier in the country. But shortly thereafter, he spoke to an overflow crowd of supporters in the Capitol and addressed the January 6th defendants, once again airing his baseless claim that the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Okay, read the rest of this. This is what happens when either you don't vote, you sit your ass at home, you listen to black social media disinformation agents telling you don't vote, okay? Or you vote for this fool because you listen to black social media disinformation agents telling you to vote for Donald Trump. All right. Now, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but okay. I was warning people in 2023 about Project 2025 because it came out in April 2023, and I saw what was coming. This is the type of research that I do. Okay. So, and Project 2025 was called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. The Heritage Foundation has been putting out their policy platform called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise since 1981. And they've been putting it out every election cycle, every presidential election cycle since 1981. Project 2025 was the latest version of Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. Okay, that's not the first version. That's the latest version. I know Vice President Kamala Harris said they can you believe they wrote this down? Yes, I can believe it because they've been writing it down for over 40 years. Because when you research this, and I broke this down in November 3rd, 2024, when you research Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, they released that in 1981, and it was a book, and it was a book that they actually sold. Ronald Reagan gave copies of Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, from the Heritage Foundation to all of his cabinet members. And Ronald Reagan, the Reagan administration, adopted 60% of the policies from Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. They adopted 60% of those policies in the first term of Ronald Reagan. All right. And I think this is this right here, this comes from the Heritage Foundation's own website. Okay. Now you're not going to get this type of information from a lot of other sources. All right. But besides me, a lot of other people are not dealing with this. They talking about who slept with who, and this hip hop artist, that hip hop artist, Simple Simon nonsense. We don't deal with that here. We got real work to do. This is from heritage.org, the official website of the Heritage Foundation. Okay. And there's another article that I want to show you, and then I'm gonna get out of here. But here, we'll start with this one right here. Reagan and Heritage Foundation, a unique partnership. This is June 7th, 2024. This says here, Ronald Reagan and the Heritage Foundation, it's hard to tell the story of one without much of the others. Heritage Foundation was President Reagan's favorite think tank, and Reagan was the embodiment of the ideas and principles Heritage holds dear. The partnership began in 1980 when the Heritage Foundation provided the president-elect's transition team with, pay attention, detailed policy prescriptions on everything from taxes and regulation to trade and national defense. The published version of these recommendations, the 1,100-page mandate for leadership, was described by United Press International back then as, quote, a blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels. New Deal, President Franklin Roosevelt, okay, reversing New Deal policies and also reversing civil rights policies, cutting the social safety net that was helping impoverished African Americans. A blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels and shaking out 48 years of liberal policy. End quote. The new president used mandate for leadership to help realize his vision of a world free of communism, an economy that didn't crush people's dreams with high taxes and regulations, and an America the world could admire once again. He, Ronald Reagan, gave copies of Mandate for Leadership to every member of his cabinet. What was the result? Nearly 2/3 of Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise policy platform, policy book from the Heritage Foundation, nearly 2/3 of Mandate's 2,000 policy recommendations were adopted or attempted by the Reagan administration. So you scroll down, 60% of the suggestions enjoined on the new president were acted upon, which is why Mr. Reagan's tenure was 60% successful. This is what conservative commentator William F. Buckley Jr. said. Okay, the Heritage Foundation been doing this for over 40 years, and a lot of people just found out in July of 2024 when Taraji P. Henson talked about this at the BET Awards. Are you serious? And they've been putting this in writing. I guess the old adage is true. If you want to have something from black people, put it in the book. This is when a lot of people found out about Project 2025, when Taraji P. Henson talked about it at the BET Awards. And that night and the next day, Project 2025 was trending in Google searches. Okay, so we have that, and now I know Donald Trump lied and said he didn't know anything about Project 2025. That's a damn lie, because there was 140 people that worked in the first Trump administration that helped write Project 2025. I broke all the go watch my video where I deal with how it was exposed on Fox Business News in 2018, and they broke down the connection between the Heritage Foundation and the Trump administration. And this was, they talk about how in Trump's first year in office, they adopted, the Trump administration adopted 64% of the policies of Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise from the Heritage Foundation. So you don't know about Project 2025, but you implemented all this from the Heritage Foundation back then. And in 2017, Trump spoke at the Heritage Foundation's conference. He knows Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation. J.D. Vance wrote the foreword to Kevin Roberts' book that's about to come out. You think these people ain't all in the bed together? And there's a history of this. Okay, now let's look at this one. This is from the Heritage Foundation's website. I can go to their sources and show you the skullduggery and what's going on. This isn't NBC News or ABC or something. This isn't some liberal source. This is right from the Heritage Foundation's own website. Everybody watching, who has shown this to you before besides me? Who has shown this to you? All these black social media platforms out here. Who has shown this to you before besides me? And I broke all this stuff down on my show November 3rd, 2024. And we've been re-airing that. Trump administration embraces Heritage Foundation policy recommendations. January 23rd, 2018. January 23rd, 2018. Okay? 1 year, this is what it says. 1 year after taking office, Donald Trump and his administration have embraced nearly 2/3 of the policy recommendations from the Heritage Foundation's Mandate for Leadership. Now, all of a sudden, you have amnesia and don't know who the Heritage Foundation is, don't know nothing about Project 2025, but Project 2025 is the latest version of Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise. All of a sudden, you don't know nothing. The Mandate for Leadership series includes 5 individual publications totaling approximately 334 unique policy recommendations. Analysis completed by Heritage determined that 64% of the policy prescriptions were included in Donald Trump's budget for implemented through regulatory guidance or under consideration for action in accordance with the Heritage Foundation's original proposal. This was just in the first year of the first Trump administration. This was in 2018. Okay. An analysis completed by the Heritage Foundation determined that 64% of the policy prescriptions from Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise, were included in Trump's budget, implemented through regulatory guidance, or under consideration for action in accordance with the Heritage Foundation's original proposals. Quote, President Trump had an extraordinary successful first year. No, he didn't. Says Thomas Binion, director of congressional and executive branch relations at the Heritage Foundation. He put a conservative on the Supreme Court, stolen seat, Neil Gorsuch, stolen seat from President Barack Obama, because Republicans took back control of the U.S. Senate in 2014, and Mitch McConnell and Republicans blocked 103 federal judge nominations from President Barack Obama and blocked Merrick Garland as Obama's Supreme Court nomination. I wasn't a big cheerleader for Merrick Garland, but Merrick Garland would be much better on the Supreme Court than Neil Gorsuch. And the reason why Trump was able to do that and get 3 Supreme Court nominations is because not enough people voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I wasn't in love with Hillary Clinton, but I know a fraud and death when I see it. If more people have voted for Hillary Clinton, Trump won Michigan by 10,704 votes in 2016. He won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania by 78,000 votes. If more people have voted for Hillary Clinton in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, she would have won. You'd have a 5-4 liberal Supreme Court as opposed to a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. And now that he's won again, expect Clarence Thomas and probably Samuel Alito to retire, and then Trump will get 2 more Supreme Court justices. Okay, he'll get 2 more Supreme Court justices confirmed. So he would have gotten 5 Supreme Court justices confirmed to a lifetime appointment. That's what's at stake. Now, all the stuff he's done today, the executive orders, all this stuff, what does this have to do with bringing down the price of groceries and eggs? And all that stuff he talked about on the campaign trail. Oh, I forgot. He said in his Time magazine interview when he was named Person of the Year, he said it's very hard to bring down grocery prices once they go up. He wasn't sure if he could do it, but that's not what you said on the campaign trail. You said soon after you take control of the office, soon after you get sworn in again, the prices are going down. Now all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, that's hard to do. I don't know. I don't know about this." But we're gonna pardon these domestic terrorists. Now let me show you something else here. Everybody all right? See, this is why I don't get invited to Dr. King Day celebrations, because I ain't a good Negro. I don't get can't have him. I don't get invited to that stuff. Not to speak. All right, let me show you this here. Now, there were about 70 people on Trump's transition team. Now, watch this clip here. I showed this on my show November 3rd. This is the segment from Fox Business News where you have a representative from the Heritage Foundation, Thomas Benyon, bragging about what the Heritage Foundation has gotten implemented through the first year of the Trump administration and the policies they've gotten implemented. And one of the things they said they still want to get repealed is Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. Go watch that. Heritage Foundation research analysts began developing the policy recommendations in 2016 during the presidential campaign with the following principles in mind: free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values. I'm not sure what that is. That he cheated on his wives, had sex with a porn star. He's a convicted felon. I'm not sure what traditional American values you're talking about. And a strong national defense, with approximately 70 former Heritage Foundation employees also found liable for sexual abuse against E.G. and Carroll. So what traditional American values? I'm not sure what you're talking about. With approximately 70 former Heritage Foundation employees working for the Trump transition team or as part of the administration, the policy recommendations have served as guidelines for reducing the size and scope of the federal government through specific and detailed actions. So the transition team was in 2016 to early 2017. That's after the November 2016 election up until January 20th, 2017, when he took the oath of office. The first mandate for leadership was released in January 1981. Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise from the Heritage Foundation, containing policy proposals of reform that would make more efficient and effective, that will make government more efficient and effective. President Ronald Reagan distributed the Heritage Foundation's book at his first cabinet meeting. Read the rest of this. You know how long this has been going on? And people just found out from Taraji P. Henson at the BET Awards. And they put all this in writing, and still not enough of us voted to stop this nonsense. Examples of some of the most notable policy recommendations and their adoption or implementation by the Trump administration include leaving the Paris Climate Accord in August 2017. Now Trump just signed an executive order, or he's about to sign one, to remove the U.S. again from the Paris Climate Accord because Joe Biden put us back into that. In August 2017, Trump announced the U.S. was ending its funding and membership in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Donald Trump is a climate change denier. Repealing net neutrality, December 2017, reshaping national monuments, reinstating the Mexico City policy, increasing military spending, reforming temporary assistance for needy families program, TANF. The Trump administration adopted and is in favor of strengthening existing work requirements in order to receive benefits. Okay, but most of the people receiving those benefits for needy families, things like that, those are majority of them work. They're the working poor. Okay, read the rest of this here. Now, Trump administration embraces Heritage Foundation policy recommendations. January 23rd, 2018. This is from the Heritage Foundation's own website. Okay, heritage.org. Now let me show you something else here. You've heard me talk a number of times about the documents from whitehouse.gov, fact sheet, the Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. You've heard me talk about this. Now, I got this printed up. This version is from February 27, 2023. Okay, February 27, 2023. You've heard me talk about this on the African History Network show on Roland Martin Unfiltered. This is a 36-page document that walks you through policy by policy and shows you how the policies of the Biden-Harris administration are helping the African American community. Okay. If you go to whitehouse.gov now, after Trump has taken the oath of office and didn't put his hand on the Bible, I guess vampires are afraid of Bibles or something, or maybe it wasn't a Bible, maybe it wasn't those $60 Trump Bibles. This stuff has been removed from whitehouse.gov. Because I have these bookmarked. And for instance, let me show you. When I was interviewing Professor Manu and Ampim, I was going through looking at some things and looking at some of my bookmarks. This stuff has been removed from whitehouse.gov. Because he just signed an executive order. He just signed an executive order banning diversity, equity, and inclusion from federal policies and federal departments. Okay, so if we look at this here, era 404, I want to see how much they show you of this. Okay, they don't show you the link I'm trying to go to. So let me just do it like this. Okay, if we just Google or use Yahoo, how have the policies of the Biden-Harris administration help Black people? Okay, because I always tell people, Google that. Okay, just Google that and look at the documents that come up, right? So I'm going to flip over because I'm in Google Chrome. So I'm going to show you here. Okay, so if you just Google this or use Yahoo or Google Chrome, whatever search engine it is, right? Look at this. How have the policies of the Biden-Harris administration helped Black people? They have a 36-page document there that was there. Then they have a new one that came out in like September 2024. They have all these new ones. So look at this here, February 6, 2024, right? Fact sheet, the Biden-Harris administration advances, this was the one, advances equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. So you click on it to go to it. It's not there anymore. This was evidence of how policies of the Biden-Harris administration were helping Black people. Okay? Now, hold on. Let me show it to you here. I want to show you the error message. Now, this dude removed it, this felon, this criminal, he removed it from whitehouse.gov, but freed the domestic terrorists, giving pardons to the domestic terrorists. And this was showing how policies of the Biden-Harris administration were helping the African Americans. $16 billion for HBCUs from 2021 to 2024. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. This one right here. Now, this is the one, all these policies. The Inflation Reduction Act, there was $2.2 billion for African-American farmers and farmers of color in there to address historical discrimination. Now, this version right here is from February 27, 2023. The Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. When I click on it, page not found. It's gone. And if we look here at I want to go here to NBCnews.com. If we look at this, because I saw some of the executive orders he has signed or is about to sign. I saw one dealing with banning diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is straight out of Project 2025 for those that have not been paying attention. Trump signs executive orders on immigration and reverses Biden era actions. Where is that on DEI? Hold on. Maybe right here. Okay, he signs the first executive orders of his new regime. And a lot of this is going to be challenged in court. I'm telling you right now. They may have it on the MSN. They may have it on the CNN's website. I have to go to CNN's website to look at something here. But this is how elections have consequences. And people thought, you had some Black people voting for Trump because they thought he was going to give more stimulus checks. He hasn't said anything about stimulus checks, but that came from Congress. And you got larger stimulus checks from the Biden-Harris administration through a Democratic House of Representatives and a Democratic Senate through the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. You got larger stimulus checks there than you did when Trump was in office. So how do you want Trump back to get something that he hasn't even said he's going to do, and you got more from Biden-Harris? It doesn't make any sense when you listen to some of this nonsense people say. Okay, pardons, all that. I got to find the information on DEI. I saw it looking at all the, because this all this stuff is rapidly developing. But you'll hear more. You'll hear more. Okay, Support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App. We have a QR code here. You can also go to our website, africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com. Don't say I didn't warn you, because I warn people continuously, broke this stuff down. And, you know, Detroit had 47.4% voter turnout. Are you serious? You know how ridiculous that is? Hold on, let me see something here before I get out of here. Because all this information was coming in at one time while I was interviewing Professor Manu and Ampim. Give us a thumbs up on this broadcast. Give us a heart. Give us a like. Post your comments here. Okay, so if we look at Axios.com, this right here, Trump rolls back DEI programs for federal workers. Okay, so this just happened. All right, let me flip over to this. All right, this is Axios.com, AXIOS. Trump rolls back DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for federal workers. Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday, January 20th, 2025, dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within the federal government. Why it matters. The U.S. government is the largest employer in the country with 3 million workers, nearly twice as many as private sector job leader Walmart, which also recently rolled back its DEI policies. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Federal policies set the tone at the top for workplaces around the country. Federal policies set the tone at the top for workplaces around the country. So if you voted for Donald Trump because you thought he was going to lower the price of gas, and presidents have not had control of the price of gas since World War II, okay? If you thought he was going to lower the price of eggs, if you thought he was going to lower the price of groceries, well, you got your answer when the Time magazine interview happened, and they named him Person of the Year, and he said it's very hard to bring down grocery prices once they go up. He couldn't tell you how to do it on the campaign trail. He couldn't tell you how he was going to do it. He wasn't talking about going after corporate greed, because they were all financing his campaign. They were donating his campaign. $277 million from a white supremacist South Africanist, Elon Musk. The big picture, the president and his allies, particularly White House advisor Stephen Miller, one of the biggest white supremacists you ever want to meet, Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller's mentor, when Stephen Miller was at Duke University, was Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer was the man who coined the term alt-right. Okay, now you're about to have a MAGA insurrection between the Stephen Bannon wing of the MAGA party, okay, and the elitist Elon Musk wing of the MAGA party. Now, Stephen Bannon just lost the second round because he lost on the H-1B visas. He was against those. Elon Musk came out in support of it. Vivek Ramaswamy came out in support of it. Vivek Ramaswamy is leaving Doge. Okay, he's leaving Doge. So all this, you're going to see this fracturing and it's already beginning, of the MAGA coalition. Stephen Bannon, who used to run Breitbart News, and Breitbart was said to be the home of the alt-right. Breitbart was financed by Robert Mercer. Robert Mercer is a billionaire hedge fund manager who is anti-civil rights and who was one of the major early financiers of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. Research Robert Mercer. All these people are connected. Kellyanne Conway used to manage Robert Mercer's family's super PAC before she went to the Trump administration, before she went to the Trump campaign. That's where some people from the Trump campaign came from. They either came from Breitbart News, like Stephen Bannon, or they came from Robert Mercer's family's super PAC. Research all this. I don't have time to get deep into this. Okay. The president and his allies, particularly White House advisor, punk ass Stephen Miller, have been outspoken critics of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they want to keep all of these resources and opportunities for white people. Okay. Let me block this dumbass troll right here. Who's this? Matthias. Get the hell out of here. Block this troll. Bye-bye. Yeah, go to a white supremacist page. Bye-bye. I've got trolls in different area codes, and they don't want to deal with facts and evidence. They just want to run their mouths. Okay, go run it somewhere else. Helping drive wider backlash in the private sector. Though the executive order is limited to the federal government, a Trump official reportedly said more actions on DEI are coming soon that would impact private business. And they've already happened. We've already seen a backlash in a rolling back of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Facebook, Walmart, other corporations, and you're going to see a lot more. Zoom in. The Trump order rolls back President Joe Biden's orders that put many diversity initiatives in place. Those 2021 Biden orders in turn reversed Trump's order on diversity from his first term and implemented new initiatives. Because in September 2020, the whole backlash to critical race theory, Donald Trump led that with his executive order in September 2020 banning critical race theory when it came to training for federal employees. That was 6 months before the March 2021 series of tweets that conservative activist Christopher Rufo put out, talking about redefining what critical race theory is, and relabeling anything that they didn't like dealing with the history of the civil rights movement and slavery and different things like this, putting it all under the umbrella of critical race theory. Then Fox News was used as an echo chamber to attack critical race theory. Then you had states passing laws restricting what can be taught in schools dealing with the history of the civil rights movement, the history of slavery, and they were lying, saying that critical race theory was being taught in K through 12. But critical race theory was created by African-American legal scholars like Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 1960s, and it's a legal analysis that's taught in law school, graduate school, and a little bit in the undergraduate level. It's not taught in K through 12. But these people didn't care, just like the big lie that they were pushing to get put in place voter restriction laws. They don't, the reason that they make doesn't have to be true. It's to bring, it's a means to an end, to put the policies in place that they want. They just make up any bullshit. This is what they're doing. We have to be smarter and understand that elections have consequences, and understand how to see these threats coming and stop them at the ballot box. It's not always about what a politician can do for you is also understanding how to stop and block what people are trying to do to you through the laws and policies by either elected officials or appointees of elected officials. Through President Joe Biden's order, the administration had prioritized collecting workforce demographic data, recruiting folks from underserved communities, evaluating hiring practices through a diversity lens, and addressing pay inequities. This is what the Biden-Harris administration were doing. Trump's about to reverse all of this. One order put in place on January 20th, 2021 broadened sex discrimination protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity, but have faced pushback from conservatives hostile to protections for transgender people. Transgender people, you can say what you want to about them, but they only make up 0.6 of 1% of the U.S. population. You could be against them, you could be for them, you may not understand it. Things like what they make up 0.6 of 1% of the U.S. population. Transgender athletes competing against your daughter or son ain't a big deal. It's not a big issue. But Republicans spent over $200 million in the 2024 campaign running anti-transgender ads. Say what you want to about them. They make up they make up less than 1% of the U.S. population. All right, read the rest of this here. Now, what Trump is going to do, is he's going to reverse this. So what they talk about, let me see something here. There were 10 executive orders that Biden signed on day one in office. One of them was Executive Order 13985. I've talked about it here on the show before. It does not get a lot of attention. Okay? A lot of people didn't talk about it. Executive Order 13985 dealt with reviewing policies in the federal government and coming up with policies to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they came out with 300 policies and implemented them across 90 federal agencies. Okay. So there was a article from thegrio.com that talked about this once it was implemented. Let me find this article because I had this. I have this up here. Hold on, I got a bunch of articles up here. Open. Which one is that? It's from thegrio.com. And okay, I think it's this one here. No, this is a different one, but I'll show you this one and then I'll go to the one I'm looking for. This one right here is from 2023. You're not going to see more headlines like this coming from the Trump administration. Vice President Harris leads new charge to address racial bias in home appraisals. Quote, for generations, many people of color have been prevented from taking full advantage of the benefits of home ownership, end quote, says VP Kamala Harris. This is from June 3rd, 2023 by Garen Keith Gaynor, Gaynor. The set of actions announced by VP Harris on Thursday is a result of a special task force that was convened by President Joe Biden in 2021 to put forth recommendations to tackle racial disparities in home valuations. That means the home appraisals, because we saw story after story, and we covered a lot of this on the African History Network show, where African Americans' homes were underappraised with a white appraiser, and then they have a white friend sit in, pretend to be the homeowner, and they'll take down all the African American pictures of the families and African American art and African art, and put up white pictures of families and things like this, and the home appraisal will shoot up by tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, well, the Biden-Harris administration were attacking that. They were addressing that issue. Is a result of a special task force that was convened by President Joe Biden in 2021 to put forth recommendations to tackle racial disparities in home valuations. The measures are a follow-up to an action plan presented by the Interagency Task Force for Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity, PAVE, in March 2022. Okay, so read that article. But the one I was looking for, and I gotta find, where the hell is that? Is another one from thegrio.com. Let me try it like this. I need to go to Firefox, and because I have a bookmarked in Firefox. I think it's this one right here. Hold on. Okay, so there were two of them. One was the initial announcement, because this was one that he signed. Biden signed 10 executive orders on his first day in office. And the other was when the policies were implemented. So let me show you the first one, because very few people talked about this. We talked about it a little bit on Roland Martin Unfiltered, when the policies were revealed and implemented. Okay, so this one right here. This is from thegrio.com. Biden delivers on promise to address systemic racism with new orders. Biden delivers on promise to address systemic racism with new orders. President Biden will issue executive orders to begin correcting the nation's racial inequity. So this is by April Ryan, White House correspondent April Ryan, January 6, 2021. On Tuesday afternoon, President Joe Biden will issue executive actions to begin correcting the nation's racial inequality. So this was the day after he was inaugurated, January 20th, 2021. The effort begins with answering a request from the NAACP to name a civil rights czar. Within the administration, domestic policy advisor Susan Rice is now also the administration's race czar, a position the civil rights organization called for in the most recent meeting with the president-elect Joe Biden and vice president-elect Kamala Harris. This is something that the NAACP was asking for. Okay. So this deals with Executive Order 13985. You can read the rest of this here. If you research Executive Order 13985, this is what this deals with. The president's plan ranges from hiring to procurement to data and access and economic agenda is An economic agenda is an integral part of the scope for the administration's plans to make these equity efforts sustainable. The official says, quote, economists and financial institutions have consistently found that ending discrimination and racial inequity in our economy is one of the best things we can do for growth. Okay, the Trump administration is attacking all of this. They're about to reverse all of this. This is all laid out in Project 2025, dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion. Data collection is very important to this plan. The senior White House official says, quote, it calls on all agencies to conduct a baseline assessment of how they are performing on key metrics like procurement, that means purchasing services, products, etc., the suppliers that you use, okay, procurement, and like their enforcement of civil rights. Okay, so read the rest of that one. Biden delivers on promise to address systemic racism with new executive orders. Okay, so that came out January 6th, January 26, 2021. January 26, 2021, right? Now, this one right here, this is when they implemented the policies or started implementing the policies because they had to do the research. This is from thegrio.com also. African American owned by Byron Allen, GRIO. Support the Griot as well. Okay, so this one here, Biden-Harris administration unveils government-wide action plans on racial equity. Trump administration is reversing all of this. Okay, that they got accomplished. They're about to reverse all of this. Biden-Harris administration unveils government-wide action plans on racial equity. The Griot spoke with agency leaders on ways their departments plan to fulfill President Biden's executive order to ensure government services are distributed equitably. April 14th, 2022. April 14th, 2022. This is after they did the research and came up with the policies. The Biden-Harris administration unveiled on Thursday, so this was in April 2022, on Thursday, a massive government-wide action plan to advance racial equity across 90 federal agencies with more than 300 strategies and commitments laid out by government leaders. Okay? They're advancing racial equity across 90 federal agencies with more than 300 strategies and commitments laid out by government leaders. Trump is about to reverse all of this. That or almost all this that the Biden-Harris administration put in place. The announcements from dozens of federal agencies are the start of fulfilling an executive order signed by President Joe Biden on his first day in office to advance racial equity across the entire federal government. So all those people talked about Asians got a hate crime bill, all that stupid ass bullshit that they were talking about. And if you read the bill, first of all, the bill was called the Coronavirus Hate Crimes Act, and it applied to everybody regardless of ethnicity. Go to congress.gov and read it. We broke that down here on the show numerous times, especially when Tyrese made those stupid ass comments that he made, okay, about an Asian hate crimes bill. He skipped over the fact that the first hate crimes act in the history of this country was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1968, right after Dr. King was assassinated. That's the Fair Housing Act. And there was a hate crimes act, part of that, largely for African Americans as a result of the modern day civil rights movement. He skipped over all that. Okay. A lot of these celebrities just need to shut the hell up, or get with somebody that understands history and policy and can educate you before you open your mouth and reveal how ignorant you are. Okay. And that includes Snoop and Nelly and Rick Ross performing for Trump, either at the inauguration or a party as well. In a video announcing the racial equity action plans, President Biden acknowledged that the commitments laid out by his administration must not be seen as just a one-year project, but a generational commitment. Okay, so read that. And then from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the Department of Education, to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, each federal agency released its action plan to advance racial equity, to close the myriad gaps in services available to underserved communities. Trump administration is wiping this out. They already removed the documents from whitehouse.gov that talk about how the Biden-Harris administration were advancing equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. I showed you, they removed that from whitehouse.gov. Okay, read the rest of this here. This is from thegrio.com. This is what happens when you listen to simple Simon ass people on social media that don't know what the hell they're talking about, telling Black people don't vote, hold your vote, all this stuff. I ain't see anybody on the other side telling white people and Republicans and Trump supporters don't vote, especially when it came down to it. I ain't hear none of them telling Republicans don't vote. In fact, white voter turnout increased this year. It was 74% voter turnout among white people based upon exit polls. All right, look, that's going to do it for us. I went way past longer than I thought it was, but we had these breaking news stories, so I wanted to cover that as well. There's going to be more. This is I warn people, the ignorant ass people didn't want to listen and they want to do some stupid stuff. Okay, you're gonna F around and find out. This is the find out portion. Okay, this is the find out portion right here. I'm not gonna say what I want to say because my mother's watching right now. She don't want me cussing, but y'all about to find out right now. Okay. Support the African History Network, $ the AHN show, through Cash App, through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Thanks, Marsha, for the support. Here's our QR code for Cash App right here, the bottom of the screen. The information is also on our website, africanhistorynetwork.com. You can register for the online classes that I teach. We do the classes live. All the sessions are archived and recorded, so you can go back and watch it anytime. You don't have to join us live in the class. And then you can download you can order my DVD lectures and digital downloads of my presentations as well. So that all will help you and help us as well. Yeah, we know African American History Month is coming up also. And let's go to this here. Let's go to the website. Hold on. Let me flip over to this one last time. Follow us. I just shut down I just deactivated my TikTok account because I ain't doing TikTok. Maybe if it's sold to an American company, if it's sold to Mark Zuckerberg, that punk mother Zucker, I don't know if I'll go back to it. I'm not sure. But I have downloaded Fanbase, so I'm setting up Fanbase also. Everybody download fan base, set that up. That's an African American owned and operated social media platform owned by Isaac Hayes III. Okay, so you can support us here. Register for the online classes I teach Saturdays, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Register right here for it. You can do a debit card, credit card, or PayPal. Download the our class lesson plan here. We have our Cash App right here, $ the AHN show. So if you type it into Cash App, type in the full tag, $ the AHN show, SHOW, because there's some fake ones out there, and they'll come up before you type in all of it. Okay. Ours, it will say Michael, and it may show my picture there. Okay. So we have a QR code here, and this shows it also right here, this graphic here. And then paypal.me/the AHN show through PayPal. And I know through PayPal, you can set it up for a recurring contribution if you want to. We definitely appreciate that as well. I can't remember if you can do that set up for a recurring contribution through Cash App. Okay. All right. Look, we have to get out of here. Hopefully you learned a lot today, because this is a lot of work to put all this together. Hopefully you learned a lot today. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. And I got to give a shout out to my sisters at Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. They just had the 105th Founders Day, January 16th, 2025. They were founded January 16th, 1920, Howard University. And my brothers of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, we just had our 111th Founders Day, January 9th, 2025. All right. All right. Talk to y'all later. Peace. Remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever.